Hi, good afternoon. My name is Heather Dories, and I work here at Carleton in the Indigenous Policy Administration Program, and it's my great pleasure to take over as MC for the afternoon. We had such an exciting morning, and I'm so glad to see so many people here. And I think we've got a really great lineup of speakers for this afternoon. So it's my pleasure to introduce to the stage once again Randall Tetlichi, who we heard from this morning. Randall is a First Nations elder, traditional healer, and teacher from Yukon College in Whitehorse, and he is a very highly respected Vuntut Gwitch'in elder who works with youth, facilitates workshops and courses on traditional healing and sharing of Indigenous knowledge. So please help me welcome once again, Randall.
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hey, now you're talking. Yeah, so once again, I'm happy to be here. So I was young once too. Yeah. I always tell young people that, but I tell them I only can imagine what you young people are going through because I grew up in a different environment. I can't tell you understand because I'll be lying to you. I grew up out on the land. I grew up in caribou skin clothes. The clothes you are wearing now, I wore it in the 60s. So you're 50 years behind and you got to catch up. So I grew up on the land way out in the middle of nowhere. It's 180 miles south of Old Crow, they call Johnson Creek Village. And we live there. We live off the land. And we use what was on the land. When I was growing up, we followed 3 laws. The first law we followed was the Creator's law, God's law. And He has 10 laws, and these laws are unwritten. You're not going to find in any book. And these laws we followed to a T. Yeah. And that's the first laws the elders teach us. I grew up with elders that are so old they were crawling around. And they still live by themselves, doing things for themselves. So when I was growing up, the elders talk about the Creator's first laws to respect. To respect all life that He created. Because all life, the Creator gave His Spirit to all living things, not only human beings, but everything you see out here. Everything has life, everything has the Creator's Spirit in it. And the elders say, I'm going to go through quickly, because I got 25 minutes, they told me. Usually it takes 4 or 5 days to talk. Anyways, the elders say the first thing you respect is the environment that you live in. That's the first one, because the environment you live in is the one that's giving you life. So you have to respect all life on that land and respect it and take care of it. Because that's the Creator's second law is to care for all life that He created. Especially human beings. Because they said nobody is better or nobody is worse than each other. Because we're all given the same things. Your body is all the same. No, the only thing different is the color and culture and songs. In a way of life. And a different environment that each nation was given. So caring for that environment is very important. Caring for that life that's in that environment is very important. And That's why the elders always say that respect life and care for life. Anybody know what respect means? Come on, quickly, you're professors and doctors. Come on. Up on that corner, you look like you're wide awake. What does respect mean? You don't know? Oh, how about this bunch? You look like you're living on Wellington Street. Honor. And how about that crew over there? You look like you're had good lunch, huh? What does re mean? Come on, you're all smart. You're in a conference. Huh? Respect means just to look twice with both eyes. Look beyond what you're seeing, because sometimes what you're seeing is not what it is. You have to look beyond that. There's always beyond. So when we're living on the land, we have to look beyond what we're seeing. So respecting the environment and caring for the environment and accepting the environment that you live in, that you choose to live in. When I was growing up, I didn't have a choice. I was living in an environment because I was born there. And I have to accept that environment and make a living out there. It was a normal thing. Everything I did it with my legs. I never sit on a skidoo or a four-wheeler or a truck looking for moose like this. This one here did all the work. And we used our own power. All people did that. We use our own power to live out there. And we have to take care of the environment and accept the environment that we live in. And when we're out there, we have to humble ourselves. Because if you don't humble yourself, you could get in trouble. With water, with snow, with animals, with birds. The smaller the animals out there are, the more vicious they are. It's not the grizzly bear that's vicious. It's that little mouse. So humbling ourselves is very important. That's what the elders talked to me about when I was growing up. And they said that you have to do that with yourself. They're going to raise you as Gwitch'in man, and number one, you have to respect how you think. If I look at this man here and I put him down, that's not respect. I gotta respect how I think about him. I gotta care about how I think about him. I gotta respect for me, myself, I gotta respect my life. Respect how I think, respect how I see, how I listen, how I talk. And then you're following the Creator's laws. I have to humble the way I think about people. I gotta humble what I see. I gotta humble what I listen to. If I listen to garbage, I gotta humble myself and say, I don't need that. And most of all, I gotta respect how I talk. Care about how I talk and humble myself when I talk. That's how, when elders say look after yourself, that's what they mean. That's how you look after yourself. How you look after yourself, that's how you have to look after that land that we live in. Because that land we live in is the one that's feeding us. No matter where we live. I live in Whitehorse, I have to respect where I stay, where I work. I have to respect the community. I do lots of work in Whitehorse because what happened in Whitehorse is my business. Because I live in there. And I work with all people in Whitehorse on weekends. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So we follow the Creator's laws, and it's unwritten laws. They're simple laws, yet they take work to apply. This morning you hear the chief said the hardest thing is to implement, because you're trying to implement foreign language. That's how come it's hard. If you implement in your language, as young people, you're going to make things better. Because as young people, we need you yesterday, we need you today, and we're going to need you tomorrow. That's how it is in life. That's how it is to be Gwitch'in, to be any kind of nation. That's the Creator's law. The first treaties were made in the 1400s. It was made in that way. But to date, nobody implemented. As long as the grass grows, the river flow, and the wind blow, that's the Creator's way. That's the first treaty that was made. Today we got many treaties. We also followed the natural law when I was growing up. Anybody know what's the first natural law? Come on, you're smart. You're living in Ottawa. Anybody here from Ottawa? Eh? Any doctors here? Professors? What's the first natural law that our people used to follow? Come on. You who respect nature as part of it, yeah. Anybody? The first natural law is to teach. All life, dude. The mouse, the bear, the moose, the deer, the sheep, the fish. The first thing they do is they teach their young how to live in that environment and how to move about. That's the first natural law, is to teach. And I chose to teach since 1980 because our young people are important. They're our future. So I focus mostly on young people because older people, they don't listen. So how we teach now, our young people are asking for teaching, and I'm very honored that I was asked to come down to help out. Because I teach all over different universities across Canada. I give lectures and seminars about life. The native way is to teach about life, how to live, how to develop yourself. When I was growing up, I grew up through stories, through legends, through songs, through drumming, through all kinds of stuff, different kind of games. And these stories are there to help you to be creative. Today we're not as creative as we should be. We want to listen to stories, we put on Netflix. You want to listen to a story, you put your cell on. Lunchtime, all of you had your cell on. Yeah. When I was growing up, I had to be creative. When the elders tell stories. When they tell stories, I had to build my imagination. These things are missing today. And it's not the young people's fault, it's my fault. That's why I'm trying to teach today. We have to build the imagination of these young people. Because that's how it works. That's the native way of teaching. because the Western way is still foreign to us. Some young people make it. I got a niece that's a doctor, first native doctor in the Yukon. But she's working in Alaska because our dollar's too low. So, building our imagination is healthy, and be able to have the ability to develop a picture when people are telling you stories. Because our children are young and we need to help them to develop that. And today I tell stories too. I tell old legends and old stories. That's how I raise my kids, Tell them stories. So the first thing is to teach on how to develop yourself. Because as Indigenous people at one time we had our own system in place. Our own way of keeping each other. Helping each other. By following the Creator's laws and the tribal and natural law. So teaching is very important. Everybody is a teacher. There's no one teacher. Everybody is a teacher. Anybody know what the second law is, the natural law? Come on, you're all smart. You're living on Slater Street. Anybody? What's the second natural law?
Say your prayers.
Say your prayers. Anybody else? Love is all part of it. Yeah. The second natural law is to heal. All life do. If the moose get hurt, they're going to give 100%. They're going to stop right there and give 100% to their healing. If a bear gets hurt, caribou gets hurt, same thing. If a mosquito gets hurt, same thing. Yeah. And human beings, they keep denying and denying and denying. Healing is the second natural law. It's okay to heal. I never met one person yet that didn't need healing. Because of how you think, how you see, how you listen, and how you talk. As young people, you're living in a different world. The world is changing. There's global warming, climate change, and you have to work with each other. You can't hang out with your own kind because you're not going to get anywhere. You got to follow the Creator's law so that your relationship with each other all over this world will be healthy for you to make it down the road. You have to do that and you've got no choice. Stereotyping is not, that have to go out the door. And someday you young people are going to have children, that's what you teach them. Because kids learn from their parents. They learn how to stereotype and they learn how to be prejudiced from their parents. Because kids going to do what you tell, what they hear you talk about. So that's healing our relationship. Healing your relationship with the land. We have to go to that land for healing. And what do you think is the third natural law? Anybody? How about that front row there? You look like you're all wide awake. Yeah? Sharing is part of it. The third natural law is to protect. Is to protect yourself from danger, to protect your family, your community, your nation, and to protect that environment. When I was growing up, the elders and my grandfathers and grandmothers tell me that. When I was growing up, the snow was white. It's not white anymore. That's how much change is happening. Protecting, like these young people, they want to learn their way, and we have to teach them their way. Protecting your culture, your songs, your drumming, your legends, your stories, your baby songs. Anybody here know baby songs? I sang baby songs for all my kids. One time I was running a camp and I had teenagers, 15, 16, 17. In the evening, I told them I'm going to sing you a baby song. They were tough like these young guys. Within half an hour, they were sleeping. And when they woke up, they were crying. Because they say they miss their mother. And these are kids that were taken away. So protecting is very important. Protecting yourself by the way you think, see, listen, and talk is very important. Because when you do that, there'll be no stress in your life. Because you're creating your own stress. It's not your dog or your cat or your boyfriend or your girlfriend. It's you. Because everything started with you. How you respond and react to every challenge that comes before you in life. Especially on the land. And there's many challenges that come with it on the land. And how you face it and how you respond and react to those challenges in your life will depend on how you live. The elders say from here up is the one that needs healing. It's not there to decorate, is it? Yeah, that's why I never combed my hair this morning, Don, right? And we also followed the tribal laws. Tribal law are very powerful laws. All these laws, these 3 laws I talk about, we were living by them when we were living out there. And tribal law relate to the Creator's law and the natural law. And one of the questions somebody asked me here is clan system. That's one of our law. The clan system there is to keep the bloodline strong, to keep the tribe strong, to keep the tribe healthy. That's why we have clan systems. And you're not allowed to wink at your own clan. You can't do that. You could wink to the opposite clan, right? You see all the young people smiling, their ears up and curly tail. Yeah. So one of the tribal law is to protect you, is to protect the nation. And it's young people's job, is to protect the nation. Your job is not to walk down the street and write on walls or go to the bar. Your job is to help the community, feed the community, clothe the community, teach the community. The only thing you got is you have a strong body. When I was young, I had a strong body. I said, nobody's going to tell me what to do. My grandmother said, sit down. I said, all you got is a strong body, you don't know nothing. My ears went down, my tail went between my legs. So that a tribal law is to protect yourself, your family, your community, your nation, and protect that environment. As young people, you have to remember that all the time. Because it's your job. Somebody's got to talk for the land. Because the land is there to feed you. We had, that's how we used to teach a long time ago. The elders, they teach us these laws. And as young people, if you want to implement these land claims, you got to use these 3 laws. Because these 3 laws is in your DNA. It's there. That's why you talk about you don't know what come out. That's what it is. It's the DNA. And you have it. And you could get it back if you work for it. Before I went to residential school, my grandfather said, "Grandson, we taught you everything about our way." He said, "Now you're going to a different environment. There's different people there. There's different language, different food, different games. You go there and you get what you need from there. Because someday you're going to be living in that world." So that's what I did, you know. I never went to, I quit grade 12 because I had no money. And I wanted to work. And it was through the traditional teachings and training and healing that got me this far in life. So today I tell young people, try to get what you could while you're young, because you got the energy to do it, you got the stamina to do it, and the time is now. It's not tomorrow, it's now. So always remember that and go for the highs. When I was young, I didn't like who I was. I was ashamed I was an Indian. Yeah. After I got healing and got well, I'm proud to be a First Nation because the world is watching you. The world is watching the Indigenous people, and they're saying that, by God, these people have something we don't have. So time is now to learn. And I give a long lecture about these in different universities that I go to. So far I went to UBC, University of Alberta, Saskatoon. I went to Queen's last fall. I went as far down as Georgia Tech just to give a lecture and seminars. And I'm giving the same message to all the young people, because all the young people are hearing something they never heard before, and they want to learn from all nations. And that's very important. So I gave you some of the laws, and your homework till you take your last breath is trying to find out the rest of the law. I give the longest homework. I want to sing a couple of songs now, so I need 3 volunteers. Come on, you're supposed to run up. You want to learn. How about these 3 young guys? Yeah. These rattles is from their moose skin and caribou skin. I make them. This elders long time ago, they talk about drum. We had our own drum, our own song, and they showed me how to make drum. To make a drum take about 10 full days. It's all teaching. 10 days of it. And Randall's is 2 days. There's one caribou there, and the others are moose. This song, since we've got people from other side, what's that? Dingy Katia. They're going to sing Fort McPherson song, Tetlichi song. In the 90s, this old man was ready to pass away. He's just old. He said, I'm not going to be around very long. He said, I want to give you this song, and someday when people are ready in McPherson, you could give it back to them. So this is McPherson song. Now come on, practice. This song is saying, Gwitch'in, work hard. Give it all you got. Give it all your energy. Everything you do, work hard to achieve things. The next song I'm going to sing is Working Together song. Again, this song is, what this song is saying is go over there and help braid that rope. That rope, it could be your hair. Go help braid that rope and make that rope strong so your people could be strong. All you people go braid one braid even. That means helping your family and your community and your nation to be strong. Not to go around and write on walls and put each other down and gossip. That's not the way. You have to work to make your community strong. As young people, you have to try to remember that. Always follow the Creator's law, the natural law, tribal law, so that your generation will be strong. Not only yours, but there's lots of different nationality here too. That's how it is. So this one is Working Together song. Few minutes left. We're going to sing. We're going to sing a Northern Light song. Okay? Our people believe that the Northern Lights are our ancestors that are showing us that they're happy where they are. And that's why they're dancing for us. So when we see Northern Lights, we always give thanks. We ask the relatives to come and help us, guide us, direct us, talk to us, teach us through our dreams. And they do come. So, and this song was given to me in late 60s by an old lady in Old Crow. So, I'm fortunate. I was around old people all my life. I was always attracted to old people no matter where I go. And that's how I learned. One time I wanted to know how white people think. So I volunteered a year and a half at a Golden Age Society. And that was the best year and a half in my life. Because these elders, they're lonesome and they want to talk and they want to teach. And I learned lots in that year and a half. So this one, what song was I supposed to sing? Oh, yeah. There, that should be half an hour. Thank you. Any questions?
It is now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Morley Hanson, who's the coordinator of Nunavut Sivuniksavut. Morley has been recognized for his long work with the Inuit youth, and he is a senior instructor at Nunavut Sivuniksavut program in Ottawa. He joined the program in 1988, just 3 years after it began. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Nunavut Sivuniksavut is a nonprofit college training program for Inuit youth who are preparing to enter the workforce in Nunavut or go on to further university education. Its emphasis on the history and politics in Nunavut is often described as eye-opening by more than 400 alumni. So where is Morley? I don't see him. Oh, there he is. Please help me in welcoming Morley Hanson to the stage.
Rather humbling experience to come up here after Randall's words. Would we all be able to listen to something like that on a regular basis and get us grounded in what's real in life? With that introduction, a little bit, excuse me, of overview of this program that exists here in Ottawa. It's been here for now 31 years. It's not so much related to the theme of the conference in terms of the treaties, but it is related in some way to that and to the idea of citizenship, and more to the idea of youth and young people. We learned about this conference last year when it was given in Newfoundland. Went out there and initially thought, well, they're bringing some young people down to see what university is like. Well, we'll go see what they're doing. But it seemed like an interesting idea, but a rather elaborate idea just to have young people learn about university. So we went out and gave a presentation and realized after that week just what a profound experience it had been for those young people. So that's where this program fits in, and that's where this presentation fits in. It is talking about the experience of young people and finding their way through post-secondary. It might be a little bit awkward. I don't have a copy of this in front of me, so I'm going to be turning sideways to see actually what's on the slides. I put something together this morning to help me remember what remarks I'd like you to hear about. So we'll just work our way through and see how it actually goes. You've had an intro to it already. I'll get the logistics out of the way because that's not the story I want to tell, but just to say that yes, there's a small office down here on Rideau Street where young people from across the Arctic, not only Nunavut now, but some from the Nunavut, some from the Nunavut region, come to take a leap of faith and leave their communities and come and study in a post-secondary program. They don't realize what they're getting into. They don't often have a reason for driving themselves to get into the program. They just know that a lot of young people have said, it's a good thing to do, you should try it. So they jump on a plane and down they come to Ottawa. It's a program that's a nonprofit, as the remarks at the beginning said. It's run by a board of directors, most of whom are former students from the program. And as you see here, 450 students have completed it. That's not a huge population after 30 years of operating. But given the population of Nunavut, it's beginning to have a fairly significant impact. So I'll get on now to a little bit of the story of this program because it's operated from outside the regular institutions of post-secondary education. It hasn't been connected to universities and colleges in the way most post-secondary programs are. So this one is rooted in the Nunavut land claims negotiations. It goes back to the 1980s. And it was that time that my colleague Murray Angus, who is here, was working with the land claims negotiating body, and they said, could you help these young people learn a little bit about what's going on with land claims and train them to work for us so they can go out and work in the communities. So from that small beginning with a handful of young people, the program began. And basically the story of it is simply the story of some committed educators working with young people who had a lot of things they wanted to know about the world. And that's how it all started. And it's still how it goes today, basically. It's an example of a bottom-up approach, an organic approach to designing programming. So this is not a program that somebody had a great idea, put all the pieces of it together, said this is what it'll be worth, here's the accreditation that'll come with it, here's what people will be recognized for, and then they go looking for people to take it. It was just the opposite. None of that existed in the beginning. It was simply young people and instructors thrown together and saying, you need to come up with something. And so that's how this program has developed from the bottom up. And what we found through all of that, and the main point of all of this that I'll come to, is that through all of this study, what we've learned is it's the development of certain personal attitudes that is basically the biggest part of the experience for young people, and it's the biggest thing that we've learned from it over the years. If we look at the instructional approach, it began, and as I said, with young people and instructors thrown together, and basically asking them, what is it you want to know? What do you need to know? Now, we don't reinvent this wheel every year with the course delivery. We have standard set courses now. But it still happens in some ways. Even this year, there was one person in one of the courses wanted to know, said, where do white people come from? Now, she wasn't asking white as in terms of the skin and geographically where do they come from, but where does this way of thinking and ordering the world and setting the world out for us, where does that come from? And we had to stop and realize that if you're a young person straddling between two very different cultures and two very different worlds, and you're wanting to make your way in the one that is so very different, if you don't know some of that answer, how can you make sense of any of it? So that's an example of even today where we're feeding off what is it that students need, what's relevant to them. Now, we also, from our own ideas and from working with them, have put together, so we have a standard suite of courses, but it's still based on this idea. So working in collaboration with students over time, and so from this program that began with no courses, no set agenda other than to bring about some meaningful education with these young people. Slowly the courses have developed, slowly the program has evolved. And I think we could say that, as I put at the bottom here, that approach has been the key to its long-term success, is that it began from that understanding between a group of people. It hasn't been designed by somebody else who thought something was important for young people and said, here, they should come do this, and then it'll be good for them. It's happened from the bottom, and I think that's one of the basic things we could convey. So for institutions, we know that's not an approach that most institutions can take, but it's been a valuable lesson for us in terms of the value of collaborating with students and listening to students. Overall, what goes on in the programming there? What are the courses designed around? This is a graphic that we use to basically tie together most of the content that comes in the courses. So here we have a graphic that you'll see over time, you'll see on the side there, it says power, control, independence, and autonomy. And basically, our focus is to look at the story of Inuit society over time, from a time when those societies were completely independent, completely autonomous, and had complete control over themselves, to today, and what that story has been. So we use actual documentation of materials that show us that if it was once like that many, many years ago, you could say that somewhere around the 1960s, the middle of the 1960s, people were saying and recognizing that they had lost complete control over their lives. They could still decide what they were going to do when they woke up in the morning, but in terms of the major decisions about how they were living and what was happening in their life was made somewhere else by somebody from a different society and a different culture. So for us, putting that together, then the big question was, well, how did that happen? What happened in between? If we went from one point of complete independence and power and control over ourselves to where there was almost nothing, what was that story? Well, that's part of what the coursework then became all about. And then what's happened since then, because unlike many areas of the world where that problematic still exists, within the Inuit land claims world, that there's been many, many initiatives to change that story and to resist the flow of that story. So what unifies those stories is what becomes our coursework. So basically we fill in over time what has gone on with respect to Inuit society, and the final question in any of the studies that we do is, how has this affected people? So it's not about history in terms of famous people and places and events that took place, but it's more about what are the actions that took place, where did they come from, and most importantly, what kind of impact did that have on your own society? And so that's what ties it all together. So this is the story that developed before there were even any courses in the program. The first years of the program, it was like an adult popular education approach. There weren't courses, there weren't exams, there weren't assignments. Some of the students might be saying, couldn't we have that again? But that's how it was. The content, the approach has changed over the years, but the content hasn't. But what we also look at is, how has there been resistance to that flow of time? How has there been resistance through land claims and through the development of political and cultural institutions to turn that around? So part of the programming also looks at that, where we look at the development of the various land claim agreements. And this basically, at one point, we were told that if students were going to get funding to come to the program, we had to look more like a regular institution. We had to offer courses like a regular institution, and had to they had to be accredited, and they needed to get transcripts at the end, and just like any student from anywhere. So we've had this relationship with Algonquin College here in Ottawa, and the courses are all accredited to them. And basically what we did is we took this curve and we chopped it up into courses. So we didn't change anything in what people were learning, but we packaged it differently. And so we packaged it as courses. So the core courses then are in Inuit history, that whole story of the curve, the land claims agreement. All the Inuit homelands now have a land claims agreement that lays out their relationship with the federal government and with the rest of Canada, rights and responsibilities. Each one of them is different. In this case, it's a Nunavut land claim agreement. It's a thick legal document that nobody could pick up very quickly and easily access what it's saying. So we spent time actually deconstructing it and taking it apart and finding out what are the essential provisions in there. What are the rights and responsibilities of Inuit and the Crown in that agreement. Looking at Inuit government relations, the story of Inuit land claims isn't the start of treaties. Treaties goes way, way, way back. And the approach of the central government to those treaties didn't change much over time. The attitudes towards it didn't change much over time. So that's what resulted in a land claim that took so many years for people to negotiate, is that it was resisting the initial attitudes of simply exchanging land for money in a treaty that is similar to the early treaties that took place. And as well, what are the issues that people are dealing with today? Anywhere from mineral development to the animal rights movement to housing and communities, a whole host of what we would call contemporary issues. So that's the main package of what students look at through their first year in the program. And of course, we throw in others, Inuktitut language programming, English programming, and as well as some computers. It makes for a fairly intensive year. Through it all, we've identified 3 guiding principles for ourselves in how we relate to the program and how the program operates. And the first one is relationship. And these aren't ones that we've created or identified for ourselves. It was, in fact, on an exchange with a group in Australia at an Aboriginal college in Northern Australia, where we picked up a good document and the first page of it had that education is about relationships. And we knocked ourselves on the head and said, yes, that makes sense to us as well, and that really is what we're doing. So it's a small program. There's now some 50 students come down each year, 40 or so into the first year program, 10 to 15 in the second. For those 40 students who come for the first time, the important thing for us is that they all feel like they're not alone, that they all feel like that they're in a relationship with someone, their classmates, but also their instructors, that somebody's paying close attention to them, that they're important, and that relationship is important. And if there is no relationship, then it's most likely there's going to be difficulties for the student. The next, second one in our 3 R's is relevance. If we're asking students to study that seems to make no sense and have no relevance to their world whatsoever, then what's the point of doing it? So now the second year is a little more abstract, a little more general, but in the first year, everything that we're asking students to do is somehow related to their world. So although they're down here in Ottawa studying, everything they're studying about is about back home and what's happened back home or what's happening today back home. And that's a rather, it may be counterintuitive in terms of setting up a program, but it's a very powerful mix actually, because people are so tied to back home when you're far away from it. And learning about it makes it all the more important. So the relevance, and then of course responsiveness. The ability to respond to student needs, to respond to opportunities. A conference like this comes along, we cancel classes for the afternoon and students come over here. So we're able to do those kinds of things because we're very small, we're very flexible, and we can take advantage of the opportunities. It's not an institution that's structured in such a way that certain things have to happen on a certain day at a certain time. Some of that approach in images here, a classroom setting, asking students to take positions, to debate, to find out what they think of themselves. Engaging with leaders. We have access to all types of leadership down here in Ottawa. There are land claim leaders who come through, political leaders who come through town, political leaders who live here. And so they're regularly coming through and addressing students. And what's important to this is not so much always what their message is, but simply that they've come and taken the time to say to students, you're important, and what you're doing is important, and we're recognizing you for doing that. And as well, dealing with the issues. One of our favorites over the year has, in March, around about this time when the animal rights people hold their protests up on Parliament Hill and the anti-sealing demonstrations, we go up as well and do counter-education demonstrations to educate people about the cultural value and the economic value of sealing to Inuit communities. So again, we close classes for the afternoon, we go up to Parliament Hill and do other things. It's educational. Other elements, we do cultural retreats when most institutions will have a reading week in the fall or the winter. I'm not sure why they call it reading week, but anyway, it's a week away from classes. When most institutions do that, we also take a break and we get out into the country, into a retreat, and we do cultural programming, intensive. So drum making, sewing, beading, tool making, parka making, all kinds of things. Handwork to get away from reading and thinking about books. And it serves a dual purpose of, one, reinforcing cultural aspects of the program, but also getting away from the stresses of urban life. Other elements, community outreach. Students learn the skills of cultural performing, and there's many opportunities here to go. Conferences, events, winter festivals, the Governor General's Festival, Winterlude, where students will go and present their culture. And as well, with the second-year students, taking opportunities to educate federal civil servants, public servants about Inuit culture. So doing workshops with them. So all of these are not part of the content part of the programming, but it's where students are expressing what they're learning in the programming and sharing it with others. Indeed, there's other elements that from time to time we've had Taekwondo classes there. We have a music room with a lot of music where students can get away and again, get away from books and deal with music. And we do exchange trips at the end of the year, usually to another part of the world, in exchange with Indigenous groups. Here's a photo from a group who went to Panama one year and for 2 weeks and did an exchange with them, sharing their culture. And in the this is part of the programming. The funding for it comes from outside the program. And it's something in the beginning we thought would be seen as simply kind of fluff at the end of a year to go on a touristy trip. Well, one, they're not touristy trips, they're real working trips where people are engaged with exchange with other groups many times each day. There are some tourism pieces thrown into them, but it's also a time when their whole year of study comes together and they realize all they've learned and they realize what they have in common with these other Indigenous groups around the planet. And so everything comes together at that time. So they become a very important part of the programming. And we're fortunate to be able to do it. We raise incredible amounts of money, the students do, each year to carry these trips off. This is just talking about what the program is, but what's the actual experience for students? What does it mean for students to be involved in this? It's okay, it's easy to come down to a 1 week, a 2 week, a 1 month experience in the South and be on a honeymoon with all the new things that there are to deal with. But to deal with those things day in and day out, month after month, it begins to wear on people. So it's a hugely challenging experience. There's a lot of academic work, more than students are usually used to doing. So it's demanding in that way. And that's how we usually see post-secondary. That's where it usually stops. We say, oh, there's a lot of academic work. How do you do that academic work, though, if, as Randall said, you're not healthy in other ways? They're simply living on their own. So the young people who've come from Gwitch'in territory, all the things that can add up and come into a day that can get in your way and stop you in your tracks, there's dealing with those each day. So developing those independent living skills, developing freedom skills to be on your own and to find your way in a healthy way is a huge challenge for young people. Just keeping yourself fed, having money in your pocket and getting to class is a huge challenge. All of these things add up. So if you put all of these together, it's a highly stressful experience. But in many cases, high stress situations are where there's also high opportunities for learning. And that's how it works. So while it's not always pretty, while it's really difficult for people many times through the experience, there's still 80 to 85% of them stay in that experience through the 8 months. And the reason they stay, it goes back to those 3 R's, It's the relationship and it's the relevance of what they're doing. They can't deny the importance of it. So that holds them in there through the tough parts, and there are a lot of tough parts. So when we're asking young people to go off and entertain getting enrolled in a post-secondary program, it's important to keep in mind that it doesn't matter how well they've done in school, because that has not a lot to do with it. Sure, it will help, but school and marks and that kind of part of their life is a very small part of being successful when they get out there on their own. And I think we should always be cognizant of that when we're asking young people to take that step. I'll just throw in one slide here of the Year 2 program. After about, I guess it would be 15 years of the program, there was many students who say, could we come back for a second year? We had no money for it. There was a high demand for the program. There was a lot of people interested in doing it more, and it was only after a long period of time we were able to find funding. We offer a second year. So this is a year that's more of a university integration year. We have second year students here this afternoon. Some of the courses they've taken through the year are delivered by Carleton University professors at our offices there. Some of them are courses that we've developed ourselves. Some of them are University of the Arctic courses, as you'll see there. So it's still associated with a home base and experience. That home base is one that they have access to 24 hours a day. That's their home away from home in terms of a comfort zone if they need it. So students continue on then into a higher level of study. It's just as demanding in different ways. The challenges are different. And so the hardships are just the same as well, even though they've done the first year. Some results of this initiative then over time, what happens when people leave? A lot of times people would think if you're bringing students from far away remote communities to an urban center, they're going to get stuck there and stay there and not come home. And what we found is just the opposite happens. The vast majority always go home. If they stay, it's to work in an Inuit organization or it's to go to continue their education. But less than 1% would ever have stayed behind just because they wanted to stay in the South. After that first year, the South has become a great place to visit, but not a place you want to live forever. Okay. So a survey that we recently carried out, we're doing this each year now, and the results are usually about the same. From 155 graduates, 54% full-time employed, 6 part-time, 28% in further education, meaning that there's not many people out there who aren't employed. They're not doing something. So when they leave, they're all off doing something, and we'll talk about why that is. And who's the ones who are employed, where is that? Well, a lot of them are working for the government of Nunavut. The biggest majority of them are working there. Many of them are working for the federal government, and then many again for Inuit political organizations, land claim organizations, regional Inuit associations, Inuit cultural institutions, things like that. For many people, the funders of the program, that's where the story stops. Basically, that's all the funders are interested in, is those numbers right there. Those are interesting numbers to us, but that's not the interesting story for us. That's not the reason that the program was put together. We don't see that as the reason for delivering it. And that part has to do with something else here. And what's behind those numbers? Why is it that so many of these young people are going out there and becoming engaged and getting involved? What is it that is in their experience now, or what's become part of them that allows them to do this? And as I said at the beginning, it has to do with the impact that that experience has had on attitudes about themselves. And specifically the value and their attitude about their own cultural identity. That has been the biggest learning for us, the biggest lesson, and I think one that if we could convey to anybody else who's entertaining working with youth from remote communities, that the importance of this. I'll throw a few up here. Now I'm going to be breaking the rules about a lot of text in the PowerPoint slides, but I think there's some reading that can go with it. Typical perceptions, and this isn't each student, they're all varied. They're unique individuals when they come, but typical ones are, yes, people come with a lot of positive feelings about where they come from and the land and their families, and the idea that they know that they now have their own government. And so that's important, that makes them feel good. But there's also another side to it that for many of them, there's a lot of negative feelings. A sense of inadequacy, both within their own culture, because They're not closely connected with the land. They're not closely connected with those skills that are so revered in their own culture, but also a sense of inadequacy in relation to the dominant culture around them, because they're also not skilled in that culture and how overpowering that culture seems. So what's happened to those feelings then through the year? What we find, I'm going to jump these first because I've gotten the time message here. I think the one goes to the bottom. Randall talked about how years ago he said, I was ashamed to be Indian, as it was said at the time. Well, we've had a lot of students, many students who will stand up at the end of that experience at graduation and say, I'm no longer ashamed to say I'm an Inuk. And for us, that's been the major lesson of what learning your own story is, what learning the relationship of your story, your people with the dominant society, living a very difficult experience. And what you end up from all of that is having a huge amount of respect for the people who've come before you. People see that it was young people like themselves in the 70s and 80s who resisted the political flows of the time, the cultural flows of the time, who resisted that and initiated the land claims movement, the rights movement. It's young people like themselves who carried that forward, and they're so immensely proud of that story and proud to be a part of a culture who has done that and is taking steps now to go even further. So that respect, that pride in themselves, just having the confidence from having completed something so very difficult, and then the enthusiasm that comes from that, saying, I now understand better how I fit into this world. I understand what's shaped my world. I understand what's going on out there. And I want to get involved. I want to play a part. I want to do something. I want to contribute. So that's why they all go back home, because they want to contribute. There isn't one magical piece of that whole pile. It's not a program that anybody would design and say you need all of these pieces to begin with. As I said from the beginning, it's happened organically, by chance, by people collaborating and working together. But that's the result it's had. And so I think there's lessons there for all of us in working with young people coming from these areas. We found some words, again, we're good at finding things after the fact to explain what it is we think we're doing. And so here's some words we found not that many years ago, but idea of renowned educator Paulo Freire, who was basically saying that the role of education anywhere is to prepare people for a self-managed life. In other words, to manage their affairs well in life. And how do you do that? He said you need to have three conditions. One, they need to be aware of the forces that have shaped their collective experience. They need to understand their world around them, the economic side of it, the political side, the psychological side of it. And they need to develop some of the knowledge and skills and attitudes that will allow them to participate in that world. So we didn't design around this, but in seeing those words, we were inspired by them, and that's what we aspire to as we move on. And you're going to get to meet some of these young people later in the day. I think they'll share some of their culture with you, and that's it. Okay.
I will move on to introducing our next speaker, who is Senator Charlie Watt. And Senator Charlie Watt was appointed to the Senate by the late former Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He represents the province of Quebec in the senatorial division of Inkerman, and he has served the Senate of Canada since January 16, 1984. Over the years, he has been involved with parliamentary groups, including the Canada-Russia Parliamentary Group and the Canada-Mexico Parliamentary Association. His particular area of interest and specialization is Aboriginal issues, and special interests and pastime include hunting, fishing, and raising and training husky dog teams. His varied career background includes experience in both the public and private sectors, and he is also a hunter and businessman. So I would like you all to help me in welcoming Senator Charlie Watt.
Ay, tu kisigun na kon sarak tu teo kalimalangan na kayakaning. I think you do. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, inuktitut knowing the fact that there are some Inuit here, so I'm going to speak Inuktitut a bit. Then I switch into the English afterwards. My good friend Larry, how are you? Larry and I had some experience being on the boat together up in the Arctic. This goes back to what, 5 years have already passed now, Larry? Maybe even a little bit longer than that. So anyway, him and I used to have a contest. I was on my boat, both of us were on my boat, and we decided to bring a little smaller boat with us on the boat that we could blow up and use it on the, to navigate on the small rivers, to go after the speckled trout. So every morning we get up, either out of the tent or from the boat. We made a bet who's going to catch more fish today. So sometime he does, sometime I do, sometime he does, sometime I do. Anyway, that's our experience. Anyway, nakomek tamani titawama nilaron na sigalapi gumadlonga ang yakatigi utiu si maju pitutigi luarluit. The first I would like to cover as much as I can, at least to try to run you through what my experience is dealing with the question of rights. And I do believe that maybe I was one of the first one, as an Inuk person from the Arctic, dealt with the question of rights before the question of rights existed anywhere in this country, or even outside of the country. So for me, it was a quite uphill battle, right from the beginning to the end, because we had to go through litigations in order to elevate the question of rights as much as possible, to be able to use that as a leverage to try to arrive with tangible agreement that we felt that was necessary, that have to be put together. As you remember, back in early 1970, 71, 72, Hydro-Quebec indicated their interest by way of damming a huge territory, which would have a great deal of impact, not only on the Inuit, but also on the Crees, much more so on the Cree side, which is the James Bay area. Even though that we were on the Angava side, one of our main rivers were also impacted by it was going to be impacted by the diversion that was taking place from the Angava side to the Hudson Bay coast. That's a huge amount of water that was diverted to the James Bay. That means that cutting off, I would say maybe 75% of our water needs that could flow through our community, a community called Kujak at the time. And in old days used to be called Fort Chimo. And the reasons why that community got Fort Chimo name is because it was a Hudson Bay Company post. That's where I grew up. As I grew up as a Inuk, raised as a Inuk person. Actually, I was raised by my grandmother. My mother was too busy to try to make an ends meet for us, to keep us alive, to keep us clothing. So I had to live with my grandmother. I had to be taught by my grandmother. There was no man around to teach us, other than I had an older brother. An older brother that I had was also adopted from the outside of the family into our family. And I remember that. He was about probably 12 years old, and I wasn't any more than 7 years old at the time. There was a one particular experience that I have with my brother I would like to share with you. As you probably going to think that how didn't he know? Everybody knows helicopters. Different shapes of helicopters. My brother and I have a first experience during the time when the Korea War was going on. We were on the TALK team, and I was 9 years old, and my brother was 15 years old. We were delivering the supplies to the camp that we normally go to when there is enough ice to cut across the lakes and rivers and so on. So we were on the TALK teams. While we were going along delivering our supplies before we moved our families to the campsite, we saw something that we never seen before. And at the time, I had no idea what they were, but they were helicopters. As I said, I was 9 years old, and there was two kinds of helicopters. One was staying sort of distance away from us, and the smaller one came very close to us. Makes the dogs very excited, especially when the helicopter is humming around right on top of you, and makes dogs crazy in a sense. And they were pulling. We were not quite strong enough at that time, so we couldn't keep the sled up because we had a big load. The sled tipped over on the side because of the helicopter that was humming around right in front of us. Then finally, we were dragged by the TALK teams, and one of the front of the sled got hooked into the rock, so the dogs were able to stop, but making a lot of commotions, making a lot of noise, trying to get loose, things in that nature, because the helicopter was just humming right on top of us. So when the sled was on the sideways, and I sort of looked back at my backwards, and I saw my little 22, a gun. And I said to my brother, pull your gun out, because I'm pulling my gun out. I didn't know what I was to expect, and I could see the face of the person. You know, those old-fashioned helicopter types that they have glass. Oops, they have glass in the front of and there was a person inside you could clearly see through. So I pulled my little 22 out, and I started aiming. And at the same time, I told my brother, shoot the engine. What do I know where the engine was? But I just thought, you know, we have to do something. So anyway, before I managed to pull the trigger, and I guess the pilot realized that I was pointing right at his face, he managed to turn away just before I pulled it. I hope he's still alive today. That's quite a long time ago. It's quite a story. Quite an experience that we went through. Anyway, aside from that, this is where we come from. As, if you want to call it, it's not a backwoods country, but it is, in a sense, very different upbringing that a lot of us have. As a person that spoke when I came in this morning, James, talks about the number of his experience, his culture, the differences and things in our nature and that. That's very true. You know, we never thought the time that we were growing up, the time we were witnessing what's around us, we never thought it'll become to this today. But today we have been involved in the litigations, back and forth, Court of Appeals and things in that nature. And then these people also talked about, after the negotiations, what do you do? There's an implementations that you have to worry about. I think there was someone mentioned this morning, that's the hardest part. The easiest part is the negotiations. There's some truth in this, because I have took the government to court, took the Hydro-Quebec, Energy Corporation, Development Corporation, after they have spent millions of dollars, we were able to manage to stop them head on at the beginning. That was quite successful. That was an interlocutory injunction. It does not necessarily mean it's a permanent injunction, but it at least allow you to slow it down, to stop it, hopefully that the government will come around to start taking you seriously. That did not take place for quite some time within the process. In the Court of Appeal, when the decisions of Malouf's judgment decision was made, appeal took place because the government of Quebec decided that they have to appeal it, because after the amount of money that they have spent on it, they don't see it any other way. So they appealed it, and they won. So there was a question whether we should continue to try to pursue a permanent injunction, or should we try it another way? Maybe something that we never had any experience before, because this was our first time that we went through the litigations and being appealed at the same time. So we decided to see what chances we might have. So we came up, some of us, group of young people. We were very young at the time. I was the oldest one. I was 25, I'm sorry. And the rest of them were just barely 20. Matter of fact, I even have to wait for one member to come to become the age of 21, so he could sign a document that we were incorporating our organizations. So we have to wait for a year. And that's how young people they were. Just to let you know that there's a lot of young people today. There is a big opportunities that never risen before. And I do believe we do have this opportunity today. Because of the change of government, the attitudes of the people, that could be persuaded. Attitudes of the people can be persuaded if you're consistent in terms of making your points. You have to know what you're dealing with. If you know what you're dealing with, you could tighten it up in a certain ways to make sure that the other side, and whoever that might be, have to understand where you're coming from. And on the implementation, I spent quite a bit of time talking about this, probably was part of this, an extension about a couple of weeks ago. And I believe you were there. And I'm not going to go through the same thing. I'd like to spend a bit more time on impacts and implications of the agreement, which not often we don't hear that. A lot of time we hear the good side of the story. A lot of time we don't hear the negative side of the story. You know, as what was said this morning, that implementation is one of the big factors that we have to deal with after the negotiations. Implementation, when you're dealing with the implementations, there are certain areas that you have to understand, you young people, because you're the ones that are going to have to carry the responsibility. And those responsibilities is not going to be light. They're going to be heavy. And it's on your shoulders to carry them forward. When it comes down to the point of a co-management, doesn't matter what that co-management is, whether it's a wildlife co-management, natural resource co-management, it does not work. You know why it doesn't work? Because normally, when the decisions have to be made politically by a politician, one person makes that decision, that is the minister. Long as that one person, the minister, have the power to say no, or not even delivering the materials by the functionaries to him, that is also a very big possibility. That's a very negative aspects of the so-called modern treaties when it comes to the question of a co-management. It's a big factor. How do we deal with that? I think we need to look for a way to balance it better. Because to me, right now, it's not balanced. There's too much power on the minister's side. Somehow we need to take the few notch down from the power of the minister to make a bit more balance, because it's not balanced today. That's one of the issues that you have to come to understand and realize. For an example, caribous. We had over 3 million caribous in my territory for quite a number of years. Those numbers are diminishing. That is due to the fact that the government of Quebec do not listen to what the people are trying to say to them. Said if they keep up the momentum of allowing the sports hunters and the commercial hunt to continue to take place without realizing the importance of the subsistence hunt, they'll go. And this is what's happening to us right now. And it could very well happen to you also. So we came up with some ideas at one point, that goes quite a few years back now, to try and encourage the government of Quebec to not to commercialize, but to domesticate the caribous in the same similar way as they do in the Scandinavian country. And if you don't have the know-how, buy the know-how. Bring the people in to teach you how your people can to harvest the caribous in a better way. I think this is very doable, but it's not being done. And I think we have a pretty good idea why the government of Quebec is not really interested in getting into that type of dialogue with us. Because they're looking at the natural resources, minerals and things in that nature. So they don't want the caribous to be around to prevent the development to take place. So we're not fooled. We know what's happening. But we're not finished with them yet. And the other thing is also very important is that we were asked, not asked but told, because of what's already in law, to extinguish and surrender and release your rights, even at the agreement in principle. A lot of you people haven't gone through that. A lot of your people have not gone through that. 3 land claims regions have not gone through that. They haven't discussed that aspects of it, but we have. The Quebec Inuit and the Crees have to swim through that mud. And we're still swimming through that mud today. And we're not very happy with it. This is what we consider today maybe a new opportunity, new horizon is coming with the new government and new Prime Minister. Because he's willing to talk to the First Nation and the Inuit and the Métis on the question of government to government, nation to nation, question of sovereignty to be discussed. So maybe we do have opportunity to move out in at least maybe another notch up, so we can live with our own past. 40 years have passed now, and I left through 40 years not feeling, I would say, how would you say that in English? A success? No, I never really call this the James B. Northern Quebec Agreement is a full success. Due to the fact that we went through extinguishment, surrender, and released. There had to be a better way of doing that. Knowing very well the people in the world, when they want something, they take. They steal. Isn't that what happened to our people? So, don't you think it's a time now that we're going to have to deal with that issue? Are they going to continue on to keep on stealing things under our feet? I think we have to do what we can to convince the general public of Canada, the whole world for that matter, time to make some change, a real change. I think our Prime Minister is giving us that opportunity, and I think we should take a full advantage of that. How do we do that? How can we make sure that we don't end up stepping each other's toe? You know, it's a lot of time we made a full attempt in the past before. I'm 72 years old now. And I have gone through, and I have made a several attempt to see whether I could unify the Aboriginal groups in this country so we could have a stronger voice. And we're still not there. We are very good at destroying our own self, disrupting ourselves. We need to find a way to work together. Without having a structure in place, are we going to be able to make some achievement, positive achievement? I don't think so. We need to sit down amongst ourselves, jointly, everybody, all the Aboriginal groups in this country. Lay out your strategy. When you nail it down, then face the government, not before that. Because if you go to the government first when you're not organized, they're going to eat you alive. So I think we are capable of getting this movement going, and we had to do that back in leading up to 1982, during the constitutional time. I was right in the central of it. Some of our leaders, the First Nation leaders, went off to Westminster to try and negotiate with Westminster when the battle was here in Canada. Some of us took advantage of that and stayed here and pressured the First Ministers' Conference, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and the premiers from the other provinces. That's how we were able to succeed in entrenching Section 35 of the British North American Act, which never did exist before that. And if I could go on, but where do I jump to now? Well, I would like to leave myself open for certain questions before I go into another step, if it's not possible. It's a little slightly different from the way that you running the meetings, but before I go too far, and I would like to stall for a minute and let you people put your thoughts together and ask me some questions if there is any.
I'm not very knowledgeable about comprehensive claims and these kind of northern agreements, but I understand that the trend is to merge now the claim with the self-government agreement. And is that true? And if that's true, what does it say? Because in the case of the Gwitch'in, we're saying we're still working on implementing our agreement. There are negotiations for self-government going on now. Maybe there isn't sufficient capacity, but I'm just wondering what you think of the strategy of having a claim and self-government pursued simultaneously.
Well, it's, I was, how would you say, I received it quite well this morning when the chief indicated that we don't have the capacity to enter into that area yet. And I think, and in the same token, I think he was also saying we are still dealing with it. So in other words, he's dealing with it in a sense that have to take it further to complete it before he can actually say that I know what I'm talking about. So I really support that concept. Just let me give you my own personal experience that happens on the surrounding the self-government concept. As you're probably aware, that under the James P. Norton Quebec Agreement, the notion of a self-government is in there. Government would rather say, no, it's not in there. But I would challenge them in court if it's necessary, and I'm pretty sure that I can win the case if I have to challenge them. The reasons why that the concept of self-government is it's within the body of a treaty, because even though it's called a regional government. At the time when they raised the issue of self-government, the government of Quebec didn't want to hear nothing of that notion. So they did whatever they could to try to prevent us from not coming forward with the need of a self-government down the road. So there was a deadlock, and the government of Quebec said, well, that's not within our mandate, that's not within our constitution, and therefore we cannot even discuss it. What they have forgot is what they have in their own law. And it was already in there, within the government of Quebec law, that they can actually move in the directions of the super municipality concept. So what the government of Quebec at the time were saying is, no, we can't do that because it's not within our mandate. One of our lawyers decided to dig into the library, and he came out of the library and he came to our meeting, and he tabled, I don't know how many texts they were, right on the table, and said, you're saying that you can't do that? This is your mandate. Anyway, at that time, John Chiatchia was chief negotiator for the government of Quebec. He was a former deputy minister of Indian Affairs, and looked around. And if you see, I'm not sure whether some of you people have seen the tapes, the documentary film that we have put together on the negotiations, our experience in the negotiating with the government of Quebec, litigations and all that. Well, it's in there. It's in there talking about being talked about. Anyway, I'm starting to lose school of my thoughts, so I'm going along too far into my answer, so I'll just stop there for now. Anybody else would like to? Yes.
Hello, I'm familiar with the story of the Métis politician Harry Daniels' role in integrating Section 35 into the 1982 Constitution.
Harry Daniel?
Yes.
Yes.
I understand he played a key role. I was wondering if you could share your story of how the Pierre Elliott Trudeau government was persuaded to include Section 35 in the Constitution.
Actually, what actually happened is that I was not in the room because I had people. I have people in the front line. At time, I was trying my best not to be on the front line because they have to come back to me anyway to get some sort of a final decisions on what goes. The time that Peter Keynote, who was an MP, Inuk MP from Rankin, England, he walked across from NTP to become a Liberal in order for me to become a senator. So anyway, Harry Daniel was it was a very instrumental, and I'm sorry to say that he's no longer with us today, but he did a lot of justice to his own people, I would say. What happened is in that room is that there was Sir Trial, which is my colleague now, it's a senator. He was one of the MPs. John Christian was around also. He was the Minister of Indian Affairs at the time. And the question whether the medias were going to be part of it or not was being discussed in that room with a small number of people. And Harry turned around and took John Christian's hand and I said, well, you know how powerful Harry can be if he squeezes his hands onto somebody. Then that's exactly what he did on John Christian. So he had to say yes. To make the story short, that's how he got it. That's how the media's in there. And I got this from Mark R. Gordon, Peter Keynote, and what's his name? Eric Tagournac was the president of ITK at the time. Those were the three people were there with Harry. And I think there was somebody else, another meaty person was there too. And I believe he could have been George Rasmus, maybe he was there too, from the First Nation. He was we got him. That's another a sort of a wild story that I had to negotiate with the two territories and one province one time, just to make sure that when all our people went First Nation side, went over to Westminster to negotiate, we had to do something. We were left behind. We ended up, Dial O'Reilly was the president of the Assembly of First Nation, and he was nowhere to be seen. He got left behind by his advisors and councillors and things in that nature, and that he was, the younger generation at the time was moving into the older generation. I was one of them. So it was like Harry and George Rasmus and Steve Godfrey and Harry Allen from Yukon. So I had to call up Harry Allen one time, and they said, "Look, I know it's not. You might not agree with me, but there's something I have to try. I know that George Rasmus and Steve Godfrey were not necessarily the best friends, but they work well together, back to back. And Steve happened to land in Gujarat by accident because of the bad weather. So when I did find out that he was in Gujarat, and I got hold of my cousin Mark R. Gordon, he was my right-hand man, and I said, "Mark, get hold of Steve." I said, what do you got in mind? I said, "I need to make some kind of a deal with him." So I didn't say what kind of a deal I was going to make, but we went into the bush anyway with my big truck. So we started negotiating during the night outside in the trees, inside the trees, the bush. And Steve, I know that you and George don't get along too well, but is there a possibility you could put that aside? I said, "What is it?" I said, "I want George to become the national chief, George Erasmus." So, I said, it's not going to be easy because it's a Yukon's time. Well, let me talk to Alan. So I called up Alan and I said, "Here's the predicament that we're in, and we need to do something. Or would you be in the agreement to make sure that George become the national chief? So he'll become my co-chair in the negotiations." So that's how we managed to put together a package of what we, as the Inuit and the Métis and the First Nation, we negotiated it. The resolution, it was only resolution before the patriation actually took place. So when the First Ministers' Conference were having a conference down at the Sunder, what's the name of that place? Railroad, what do you call that? Right across from Charleroi. The railroad, conference center? Well, there used to be another name too at that time. Anyway, the meeting was taking place, and I was only invited person as an observer by the Prime Minister. So he kept assuring me that, "Don't worry about the deal. I'm not going to trade it off." The fact that he mentioned he's not going to trade it off, and it really got me worried. So why is it in his mind, if he's not planning to trade it off? So why is he telling me this? Anyway, so they went to the kitchen, so-called the kitchen, all the First Ministers. When they came out, what I negotiated was no longer there. So I walked over to him and I said, "What's happened? You told me that you're not going to trade it off, and you did." I was so pissed off. I mean, I was angry, really, really angry. And he saw that on my face. Anyway, so there was nothing I could do because it was already done. It was a done deal. So I didn't sleep the whole night. Knowing the fact that I asked for the meeting to have one more meeting with the Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, at his Sussex Drive the following morning. I lay down, but I can't sleep. What am I going to say? How am I going to deal with it? How am I going to approach him? How do I know that he got the message across? First of all, what I said to him is when I walked into the office and I looked him right in the eye to see, is there any flexibility? Because I was already looking for some sort of a flexibility, even just by body language, So I saw a bit of a weakness. That he was a bit nervous about the fact that what he did, or what he didn't do, maybe. That's what he was worried about. Not what he did, but what he didn't do. Anyway, so I said to Pierre Trudeau, I came here for a reason. And I said, I don't like this idea of losing what, number of months that I have devoted a lot of my energy into it, and felt that I was able to work out something tangible that could be assured into the Constitution. So it turned out that it's no longer there. What do we do? I'm not here to ask for any hands out. I'm not asking for your help. But all I'm asking you is to give me a time to see whether we can flush out the provinces. That's when the work began. So we put our force together, the First Nation, the Métis, and the Inuit. We began to start strategizing, what are we going to do in this country now? How are we going to approach the provinces? Independently? One by one? Are we going to try to flush them out publicly? So we decided we're going to go through the public avenue. We might as well negotiate it publicly if we have to. We have nothing else left. So that's how we did, and I believe that even before the actual 7 days, there was already an indication to put the resolution back into the text, except one word that was added on, word existing, into that resolution. Because that resolution that we negotiated was sort of open-ended. It could have easily put the government, both federal and the provincial government, into the position that they could not easily move any directions where they want to go. That's the kind of resolution that we negotiated. But when the Lahi, during the hockey game in Montreal, decided to throw in one possible monkey wrench, which is the word existing, that was caught on by the rest of the premiers. So they made a bet, if we don't do this, I think the troops are going to win. That's the way they were talking during the hockey game. So they decided to put the word existing into that resolution. Makes it sort of a ambiguity. Is that the way you say it in English? Not quite sure which way it's going to, which way it will go. Word existing could be to your benefit. The word existing could also to your, not necessarily to your benefit, depending on how far you want to go in terms of identifying the rights. This is actually what happened. Anyway, I'm sorry that I'm giving you a long, it's given me an opportunity to cover the areas that they didn't cover, so. Is there anybody else?
Hi, hello, hi.
Yep.
Okay, so my father was a major negotiator for the Gwitch'in self-government agreement, and
Your father's name?
Lawrence Norbert.
Yes, I know.
And this morning when James was talking about how negotiations, they were the easy part, and I was thinking about this moment when he told me however long it took. He said he had black hair, but by the end of it, he had white hair, and how much it aged him during that process. So I know that James was really saying that the negotiation was incredibly hard, but the implementation would be even greater.
Yeah.
And my question for you then is, I'm curious what your thoughts are on self-government and Section 35 of the Constitution, and you talked about impacts, and I was wondering if you could expand on that.
Yeah, okay. On the Section 35 in relations to self-government concept, the third one was...
I think that was it. I wanted to know your impact, like what you think are impacts of those who choose to do the self-government route.
Okay, I think what we have learned over the years, let me start off with that first, with the government authorities, is that there's many different ways to try and to come up with interpretations to make sure that you're not necessarily on track. That's one thing I just wanted to mention that. On the self-government relation to Section 35, it would have to be flowing out of Section 35 if it's going to have a constitutional flavor. And if you don't do that, then there's a quite possibility that they could try to take you into an area where you don't want to go, into more like a public sector type of a government rather than a self-government concept. And talking about that, my other experience is I had to be involved in discouraging the people to not to support the notion of a self-government at one point when they were having a vote. That's probably about 3 years ago now in my area. I have to speak against it, even though that I support the self-government concept, but it's depending on how you do it. If it was going to be in the body of a treaty, inside the treaty, then it's a part of your, it's under your control. If the notion of a self-government is jerked out of the agreement, which even though that it was the precedent was already there, and taken out of the agreement and make it stand alone, then government is going to do whatever they want to do. It'll become the extension of the federal arm. It'll become the extension of a provincial arm. I don't think this is what I'm hearing from my people. I don't think this is what the self-government is the kind of a self-government they want. They want to be part of the treaty. When we entered into negotiation with the government of Quebec and the government of Canada, the self-government, we didn't have to deal with the question of education in the negotiations, because that should have been already automatically provided to us. The health sector, same thing, the health board, taking the control over your own health issues, justice issues, municipal issues, environmental issues, economic development issues. We saying to ourselves now, today, we are very happy that we made that decision, rather than just leaving it out and let it become the government responsibility, and we didn't have to deal with it if we didn't want to. But the fact that we dealt with it and put it into a body of a treaty, that becomes self-sustained and it's in your control. Otherwise, it would be outside of your control. I don't know whether I answer you.
Thank you.
If not, make it more clear to me so I can.
Thank you.
I had one question, just really quickly, and it kind of goes along with actually what was just asked. So the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement is, 40 plus years old now. It's seen as the first modern treaty.
It's an old stock now.
And sadly enough, we still largely negotiate treaties very much the same way as was done with the JBNQA. So I'm wondering now, having the wealth of knowledge and wisdom standing before us that we do, looking back, if you could kind of maybe comment on best practices, lessons learned, if you will, going forward. There's still a lot of groups, particularly in BC, who are negotiating right now their modern treaties. If you could advise them of lessons learned, what would you advise them to do, not to do, to look for, not to look for, to fight for, not to fight for?
There are many. There are many, but I don't think I have the time to cover them all today. But what I could say is that, yes, there are things that we have learned. But would I do it otherwise? I mean, other way? Under the circumstances that we were living under at the time, under the heavy pressure, and the timing of it, and the fact that the question of rights did not even exist. People don't even used to, that was a bad word in those days. Well, the Alaskans started it. When the Alaskan entered into negotiations, the question of rights was a dirty word. And sort of have erupted on us at times. And anyway, so that's, I don't know whether I answer your questions on that.
Can I ask you something really quick? In regards to, is it true Kakisa NWT has their own self-governance? I'm not 100% sure on that.
Nunavut?
Kakisa.
Kakisa, Northwest Territories. You've never heard of it. It's right close to Hay River there. They only have about
Maybe
80 people, but I don't know how they went about doing that.
maybe municipal government? Because I never heard of anybody having a self-government today. The closest, I would say the closest one is some parts I agree with, some parts I disagree with, is the Labrador. I would say Labrador probably have the closest one to the concept of self-government.
Yeah, I was living on the highway there now. They're doing pretty good.
Pardon me?
They're doing really good for themselves.
They are, right? There must be municipal government. This is the things that, after so many years that I have lived through in the, starting off from the point of rights did not exist, and where we are today. It's quite interesting to go through the evaluation of your own experience. What I do feel today is that we're not using the right words in many respects when we're talking about certain things that is important to us. You know what that is? Government have no problem using it. Provincial government have no problem using it. Federal government have no problem with using it. Question of jurisdiction. Even if you do get modern treaty agreement, who still holds the whole jurisdiction? If it's under the federal jurisdictions, the federal government holds it. If it's under the provincial jurisdictions, it's provincial government holds it. It's not under yours. This, I do feel today, is the point that you people are going to have to start making now. If you don't make those points, a jurisdictional point, how important that is. The word jurisdiction, it's an absolute power. This is what I meant by the minister having an absolute power, not being able to make decisions for you. Are we prepared to continue to live that way? Hey, balance it. I think there is an opportunity to balance that. I think we should go for jurisdiction. In some area, might be not necessarily all together. If we're talking about jurisdictions, let's talk about a real partnership, not just a token partnership, which is being talked about today. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable to me after the experience that I have over the many years. So I think we have to become a bit more aggressive, making our points across, make sure it's well understood. Otherwise, it's going to be misunderstood. Even if you say it properly, they're going to try to twist it in certain ways anyway, to only to satisfy the government, but not necessarily to satisfy your needs. I think I've been here for 32 years now in the Senate, and I think I can say that openly and loudly, and I have no regret to say that. And I'll say it right in front of the Prime Minister if I need to. And I think his father have heard me that before. His son will hear it again from me if I'm still around. And the other things that I would like to sort of touch upon, because I know the Gwitch'in is also dealing with the... How much time do I have? Eh? Can I cover this, the international aspects of it, because it was being mentioned this morning. On the question of Arctic sovereignty, this is a file that is very close to me, very dear to me. And over the last, I could say 7 years, I've been trying to get cooperation from various countries and so on, Greenland, Alaska, Siberia, and Canada, and United States, everywhere. I get absolutely zero. And so I decided, my office, because there's only two of us right now. The other person is over there, Lisa Smith. And I lost another person, a meaty girl from Manitoba, I believe, Larry, to your credit. She went to work for another minister, so I must have done something right, and she was taken from me, and now she's an advisor to one of the ministers that deals with the democratic reform. Anyway, on the Arctic sovereignty matter, I commissioned 3 legal texts from the law firm. And the two texts, the first 2 texts, it's already public information. You can find those on my, what you call that, I'm not very good at modern technology yet, but even those that I blog. Okay, so you can access those information. And the third one, it's not out public yet, but it will become a public. It's a sort of a route map to where the options are that you could take an action in order to elevate that up to the international level. I have blocked the notion to permanent form under the United Nations. And I was very lucky to have a young lady that I know from long way back, from Alaska. She was a person that was quite effective. She was a member of that permanent forum, and she helped us out a lot to go through that avenue. So it's been tabled. So our case is known. So what's the next step? That remains to be seen. And I think one of the reasons why that there is, it seems like there was a bit of a lack of interest on the industry side from international community is because of the dollar value in the international community is way down. When that picks up again, as you can see that many different countries that are already become what you call it, already have an observer status at the Arctic Council, they probably going to be pushing for, at some point down the road, a permanent status. So what do we do when that happens? I would like to see the Arctic Councils be taken over by the first by the Inuit, with the Inuit, and maybe since the Gwitch'in, for an example, that they are part of that issue. So why don't we end up becoming a host as an Aboriginal groups in this country, to become the host, so we can begin to start harnessing the industries, rather than them scaring the hell out of us. Maybe we can get them to help, at least in some ways, put us in the right map. One of the things that scared the hell out of me is that if they begin to start extracting resources through the continental shelf under the sea without even landing on your own land, and they can do that. So we're going to have to be very careful and make sure that we don't end up losing the control even before they begin. Anyway, thank you very much. I'm sorry to hold you up.
Well, I'm so pleased to be welcoming everyone back for the final session of the afternoon. We've got a few more really exciting speakers to round out our day. And the first speaker that I'd like to introduce is Erin Freeland Ballantyne. Erin was born and raised in Yellowknife on a Quechua territory and was the first Rhodes Scholar from the Canadian North. She's a political ecologist and proud mom of 3. Erin holds a PhD from Oxford University, and her research, Sustainability's Paradox, Community Health, Climate Change, and Petrocapitalism, develops an understanding of climate change as a force of violence directly linked to petrocapitalism and colonization, and details the importance of Indigenous laws and governance steering us towards a sustainable future. Erin is also a hunter, berry picker, and participatory video researcher. So I'm so pleased to welcome Erin to this conference, and so I would invite everyone to join me in welcoming Erin Freeland Ballantyne.
Thank you. That was really sweet. Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here, and it was so wonderful to learn from our amazing elder professor, Randall. Thank you so much. Those of you that live in the North, we know that we have so many professors and that we have universities that live inside our elders. So when people say that we don't have a university in the North, I like to counter and say we have many, many, many universities and many, many, many PhDs. So I'm a young doctor who doesn't know a lot of things. But today they asked me to talk about how a university education can build citizenship and renewed treaty relationships. And I think it's really important to put a question on the end of that, because how can this happen when there's such a contentious history between research and Indigenous people, and when racism is so closely tied to the academy? And how can this happen when Northern and Indigenous voices and faces and ideas are always at the margins? How could education possibly build citizenship and renew treaty relationships when it's been designed to do the opposite? Now, in response to that, I'd like to position research as a practice of resistance, as a practice of resurgence, and as a way of taking back space. I'm going to talk about the power of research and how I came to learn about research as a practice of reciprocity. And I'm going to share a story with you about how a university education and being a researcher taught me about citizenship and renewed treaty relationships. I think it's really important to begin, by figuring out where you come from and situating yourself. So I'm a settler. I'm 5th generation of my settler side of the family to live in the Northwest Territories, and I was raised in an Indigenous and non-Indigenous family. So I have siblings that are Indigenous by marriage and Indigenous by blood. So I come from a strange hybrid space. And one of my earliest memories of school is going to language class. And Tetlichi language class happened after school, so you had to wait around after school was done. And we always used to split a 3-piece sort of square box of chicken from KFC as our snack. And everybody would be eating chicken, and we'd be waiting outside this shed that it was out at the back of St. Pat's High School. And we would wait for them to open up the shed, and Rosa Washi was our Tetlichi teacher, and we would light the fire in the stove that was in the shed behind St. Pat's, and we'd be sitting at the desk that had all the swear words written on them that they couldn't get off in this like creaky old shed. So that was from a very young age. It was like that was where Indigenous culture sat in the education system. It was out in the back in a shed, and it wasn't something that was important or critical to what you learned. It was extracurricular, and they really didn't give a damn. And when you're raised in that environment in school, and I think everyone who's gone to school in the North, you've been raised in this space of education where the state is trying to shape you to be a certain way and to think a certain way. And even though residential school is seemingly done, not a lot has changed in the education system. You're indoctrinated to behave, to sit, to listen. It's a hierarchy. And the ways that you're taught to think and the language that you're taught to speak in is teaching you a very specific way of doing things. So when we look at how we're educated in the North and how we transfer that kind of learning into a university situation, I think it's really important for people to understand that by the time grade 12 comes around and you're a Northern student, school has not been perhaps the most welcoming or safe of places. And you've spent a lot of time in really racist situations with really racist teachers. Northern Studies is a required course about the history of the North, the history of residential school. It's the bird course that nobody shows up for, and the joke is it gets given to the last teacher off the plane. So when I took Northern Studies in high school, it was taught by our gym teacher from Nova Scotia, and we sat in class and he read from a textbook about how the Yellowknife Dene First Nation was extinct. And everybody sort of started laughing because most of our class was YKDFN members, and he went on to tell them how they were extinct. And then we got to make teepees out of plasticine and toothpicks and recreate typical Indian villages. And that was what we did in high school Northern Studies. And I'm not that old. I'm still technically like a youth. So this sort of thing and this experience, it continues. And despite all of these efforts to say that we're revitalizing education, there's still a lot of the same colonial BS that's happening in our schools every day and that young Northern kids have to face. I was at a high school in Nunavut not that long ago, and Imperial Oil was there giving a presentation. And they were giving a presentation about how you could be a pipe fitter and how you could make $250,000 a year and you only needed a grade 9 education. And they were presenting in the high school. And the last slide was a really handsome young Inuit man in front of a red Ford F-50 truck. And so these are the kind of presentations that Northern kids are getting in high school. They're not getting presentations from universities sometimes, and there's amazing trips like this starting to happen. But a lot of times we're getting told that we shouldn't really think about dreaming big or dreaming far because we're really not that smart. And that message is what a lot of kids carry forward. So when I left high school, I think I had the sense that, you know, these kind of things happened in the North, and we had the Dene Nation and all these really exciting sort of political revolutionaries, and the North was really special. And I had lots of questions leaving high school, but when I left high school, I think I still kind of believed in my country. I believed in all these ideas that we got taught in school about the true North being strong and free, and I believed in the Charter, and I believed in human rights and justice. And then I got to university, and I read the Indian Act and the White Paper and all the transcripts of the Mackenzie Gas Pipeline hearing, and I realized that those things that happened in the North and the things that happened to my friends and my family, that those things happened everywhere. And it was all tied to this really ugly and ongoing history and present of colonization and oppression and inequality, and that it wasn't the exception, that it was the norm. And that most people in Canada, it wasn't so much that they didn't care, it's that they simply didn't know. And that I was a citizen of Canada, but I really wasn't sure if I wanted to be one anymore. So I ended up in this place where I had a deeply disillusioned sense of citizenship. I wasn't proud of Canada. I was really embarrassed. And I was so upset that we said all of these things about our country that were not true. We did not believe them because we did not put the theory of our nation into practice. I traveled all over the Northwest Territories listening to elders and youth as part of a community tour for an organization called the Dene Youth Alliance. It's co-founded by Elaine Alexie from McPherson and Jennifer Duncan from Colville Lake. And what I heard a lot were stories about how colonization had created a citizenship void. In the successive tearing apart nations, so many people in so many places were grasping to reclaim, to reassert and revive what it meant to be a nation. And what I kept hearing about was not nationhood on a map with borders and rulers and capitals, but I heard about the nation that's in your heart. And I learned about the nationhood that you live in, your sacred responsibility to the land, your relationship with community, with caribou, and nationhood that is a practice of being. I learned that nationhood, belonging to and from the land, was that sense of knowing who you are and knowing how you feel. Sort of like when you're on the Barren Lands and you can feel caribou coming before you see them, like that sort of feeling. And I feel like we pledge allegiance to our relationship with the land, or we pledge allegiance to caribou, that we have something that's really, really different in the way that we think about nationhood. And so when we looked at this sort of topic of like citizenship and the nation and trying to talk about citizenship, I was thinking that we really need to be challenged to reimagine nationhood and what it needs to be a nation. and to explore what we mean by nation, and then we can begin talking about what it means to be a citizen. And what are those sacred responsibilities? Because everybody has to have sacred responsibilities. Because what we're talking about is sacred. When we're talking policy or public administration or governance or politics, we're talking about the future of our children and the future of the land. And as soon as we lose sight of that as a sacred responsibility and it just becomes policy or a job, then we're on a path that really distorts us from any kind of vision of nationhood. And I think it really leads us to a place where we're disillusioned citizens instead of building thriving communities. Now, when you guys are thinking about a university education and you're taking these brave steps to come down and check it out, I think the thing that 4 years of undergraduate can give you is this freedom to study or figure out what you love and take courses and figure out what you're interested in, what drives you, and what your passion is. And this can lead you on a journey towards research. And research is sort of like a tool. Like any process of learning or exploring, coming to know can be really fraught, can be really false. And research has this sort of terrible historical baggage. There's so much racist theory, and it's given rise to a lot of really violent politics. And research has been used against Indigenous people and Indigenous communities. But I think that in the same fashion, you can use research to battle settler colonization. Research can be about turning stereotypes on their heads. And I think research is learning about respect and about making mistakes and trying again. And it's about asking core questions that are burning to be answered. And research is also power. It can be informed to make really good decisions or really bad ones. But what really matters is the quality of the research and who is doing the research and what questions they're asking. I think that in a lot of ways, research is ceremony. It should be treated as sacred, and research is like your brain giving birth over and over. It's really, really hard and uncomfortable, and you have to really push through things to make your brain grow and make new things come. I think research is admitting how much we don't know, or maybe how much we know and are scared to act on. This week there was a conference in Yellowknife, and Ethel Blond and Andrew was there from the Sawtoo. She used to be a Liberal member of Parliament. And she said, our people were fearless to live on the land and fearless to lead. And I think that that quote really reflects something that research can teach you to be a mental warrior. It can make you fearless enough to ask questions, and no matter how hard the answer might be, and no matter how huge an action it challenges you to take, you have some tools to get there. When I went and did a PhD, I did a PhD because it let me take it took 7 years. It let me take 7 years to sort of explore the things that I was interested in. And that was to spend time with elders and youth and talk about how oil and gas development and climate change happening at the same time were impacting our communities. And I did a PhD because it gave me the space to sit and to listen and to unlearn so much of what I'd learned in university and to be reminded about where I came from and what teachings were from my place. And spending that much time with elders and a group of, we had youth researchers. So we trained youth to do video, and they developed a bunch of research questions. And over a number of years, we made videos around identity and food security and caribou, using a method of participatory video research where they would go and talk to elders, and then they would transcribe their videos, and they would listen to them, and they would take action based on what the elders were teaching them. So we did things like tanning moose hide and going out on trap lines and getting ice for elders and just trying to do things around the community that the elders were saying would be good to do to learn about the questions we were asking. So in this sort of storytelling process, it allowed me to get an education, but to get a real education, to get an education from youth and to get an education from elders. Now, university education can be really, really challenging. And talking to some of you earlier about maybe where you want to go and what you want to do in university, I think that research and a university education can give you a tool that can help make you fearless to lead. Because when you come down south, you're going to be called upon over and over again in class, sometimes with your consent and sometimes not, to speak on issues. And sometimes you're going to have to raise your hand and speak out against something really racist that somebody has said. And sometimes you're going to be saying that to your professor. So coming down south to university, it's a challenge. It's really, really hard. And there's a lot of talk about indigenizing the academy. But I think for me, this has to mean a lot more than a totem pole and a token Indigenous professor. I think that this movement needs to be about turning the whole academy on its head and recentering Indigenous ways of knowing and being as central to higher education. I feel like that's what I really learned when I did my PhD, is one of my elders, Laura Toback, we were sitting around and we were videoing elders, and we were sitting around a fire, and there was babies, and she was like, this is higher education. This is university. This is what we used to do on the land together. We used to teach each other. You know, and to hear Randall this morning say, you know, like the first law is to teach. And I think that's something that was so integral to communities and something that, you know, that the state has done so much to destroy. And so given that, how do we rebuild that space? That was a question that I left my PhD with, and I started talking about with anybody who would sit down and listen. I would sit down with John Bizot or Joanne Barnaby or Stephen Cackley or whoever would sit down and have coffee with me, and we talked about education. And we talked about what would education look like in the North if it was led by Indigenous people and if it happened on the land. And that turned into sort of a research experiment. And we went around to communities across the North and we talked to young people and mothers and we said, why aren't people going to post-secondary? What are the barriers? And what would it look like if we could build any kind of post-secondary institution in the NWT? And what we came up with were barriers that were across the board. The number one barrier, any guesses, number one barrier to post-secondary for Northerners? Money, childcare, yeah, money and childcare. So the number one was childcare, was not wanting to take your kids out of their cultural context and not being able to afford to put your kids in daycare or in safe childcare. And the next one was affordability, access to financial resources and support, and having relevant courses. People said there's lots of things I can take, but none of them touch on the direct challenges of my community, what we're dealing with governance, with negotiations, with addictions. They said there's nothing relevant here for me to take. And then was just not wanting to be away from culture and community, wanting to learn from elders, wanting to learn from youth, and wanting to learn in an intergenerational context on the land. So we took those barriers and those desires, and we created the framework of a program, and that's what became Dechinta. And Dechinta is a land-based university. It's accredited by U of A and McGill and UBC. And from the get-go, we said accreditation is important because we're really tired of certificates and people being like, oh, Indigenous education happens on the side in a culture camp after school. We're saying no, that this is central and it's higher knowledge and it needs to be accredited. So we worked with university partners, and we had really good buy-in from the U of A. The Faculty of Native Studies at the time said, you know what, on the land university education, that sounds like a really good idea. We want to support this. So we had drive from within an institution to accredit programming. We did a pilot in 2010, and now we've been doing it for 6 years. We have over 300 students and 0 dropouts. We have 8 courses that are accredited, and we're moving towards doing a full degree. And I think what this does is it sort of created this new space of discussion around what does education mean and what does higher education mean in a Northern context. And it's really pushed the boundaries that we put around what counts as learning and how we learn. And it's been a battle, but I think a lot of Dechinta has been asserting what we believe to be a practice of citizenship and how we are good citizens by changing how we learn and how we learn together and making sure that our elders and our young people are central in that learning. And simply by bringing people together out on the land in big groups, and we run in cohorts of about 45, and we can have babies up to like 93-year-old elders. And everybody's out learning together, and we do critical academic work, we do theory, we write papers, we go hunting, we go trapping, we go fishing, and all of this is integrated together. So the lessons about governance and leadership, they happen when you're out planning a hunt and deciding how to take care of the meat and how it's shared and how it's prepared and how you work on the hide. So all of these things are integrated together. So it's not this separated space. It's sort of this informing, but it's held in this nest of that our elders in the land are there to teach us, and they're our most honored professors. And I think that whether it's settler students or Indigenous students, just having a space where that's the focus really changes what post-secondary is like. And it changes the way you think and the way you act and the way you feel when you're at school. So with Dechinta, we've been trying to build this idea of an active land-based knowledge economy in the NWT. Thinking about this idea of what if we had land-based semesters in every region of the NWT, and this was hiring elders and language keepers and creating curriculum, at the same time putting people through university. So this is something that we're moving towards and pushing to have core funding and more partnerships to be able to have Dechinta happening in regions across the NWT. And I think this kind of action is really critical at a time when we're talking about truth and reconciliation And I think in a lot of respects, truth and reconciliation, we keep saying it, but we're not really talking about what it means. In a lot of ways, it's sort of become this buzzword. And as a researcher, I'm immediately suspicious of buzzwords, especially when they get sort of sloganed by the government. And I think they need more substance. So we really need more truth. We need more truth in education. All Canadians should know not just what happened, but they should understand how the ongoing colonial present impacts us on a daily basis and what our role in it is as settlers, as non-Indigenous people. It's really critical that we ask those really, really tough questions, and that the onus and the burden isn't put on Indigenous professors to have all of those answers for us. I think that Canadians should be really, really upset and up in arms about what continues to go on. And I think without a really deep exploration of what truth means, I don't think we can hope to find what it means to be good citizens or a strong nation. So I think that if we're to be a strong nation all together, we have to ask really, really tough questions of ourselves and to be fearless to go into places that are really, really scary to figure out where we go from here. Putting that question in a Dechinta context and trying to unpack truth and reconciliation is really critical. One of the things that we're working on right now is nationalizing nation to nation to nation Dechinta semesters next summer by doing 5 major canoe expeditions across the country, reimagining what treaty is, reimagining that relationship and looking at Indigenous treaty history and settler Indigenous treaty history through Canada on the water and gathering in communities to try to have conversations about what does truth and reconciliation mean, what action can we take. So this project called Rivers of Reconciliation is sort of one of the things that we're doing as an action project to try to make this conversation deeper and bigger and try to make sure that it keeps on going. So in this way, I think that university education is a tool to sort of overcome and override and to create the change you see and that you want to be in your communities. It's a way through scholarships and bursaries that you can have some money and you can do the work that you love. And I think that's a really amazing thing. There's a ton of freedom that can come with being a university researcher. If you want to research heavy metal and like the history of Navajo rock and roll, you can do that as a PhD researcher. Whatever is the thing that really gets you going. As a researcher, you can do that. If you want to spend years learning from elders about women's political resistance and beadwork, Gwitch'in scholar Lois Edge did that. There's so many amazing things you can do as a researcher. So I think that for me, research really gave me the gift just to have the space to explore who I am and what my responsibilities are. And I think to really sort of move beyond the theory of decolonization or the metaphor, like Eve Tuck would say, and to really get into like the messy business of what does it mean for me as a non-Indigenous person to be a citizen of Treaty 8, to be a treaty person? What are my responsibilities? If it's a treaty of peace and friendship, how do I be in my home as a guest, respecting the values of the Dene Nation in the best way I know how and ever striving to be a better human being? Now, without a university question, I think that these questions would, a university education, I think these questions would really sit on my shoulders and weigh me down. But now these questions, I can kind of live with them in my heart. And I have values and commitment that are oriented around decolonization. And I can align that in my work and my daily practice and how I teach my kids and how I live my life. And so I think that with my skills as a PhD researcher and getting a higher education, it really just gave me the space to push back and have a space in the North where we can have an option where we're honoring and practicing with Indigenous professors and elder professors and be on the land together. So I think that education is about reciprocity. It's about sharing back. It's about healing and growing for yourself. And I think that we can really invigorate the North and that it's a critical time for all of our young people to be whoever they want to be and to be strong and unified and build the kind of North that our elders talk about. And then I think wherever I go, I talk to youth and we want such beautiful things for our home and for our future. And that if we're going to realize self-government and self-determination, that it can be this really, really beautiful thing and we can build nations that we're all really proud to be a part of or to be guests in or to be leaders of. So I think when I go back to the question of how a university education builds citizenship and renewed treaty relationships, I think by creating a space in your life where you can become fearless and deeply proud of who you are and where you're from, and you can take the time back to put all of this theory into practice and become dedicated to work for the love of your community and your land, and then you can stand up and say, I'm a citizen of a nation that I'm really proud that I helped build. And so when we have that question of post-secondary and what it can do, I think it can help you do whatever you want it. You use it as a tool that you fashion to get the job done that you need. And I'm really excited to see so many of the people who are from NS and that came from Gwitch'in territory and Gwitch'in Nation going on this journey and looking at what they can do and where they want to go. And that you have the support of your nation and Jordan and your elders behind you in this mission as you're building your nation to realize what self-determination and self-governance is. So I was really honored to be here today with all of you. And I wanted to leave lots of time just for questions to touch on things and have space to hear what you guys have to say. So, masicho, chimagwich. Come on. On the internet.
I don't mean to be like that, but my juju tells me Gwitch'in people don't use paper, like ever, for anything, and I hate to be like that, like I said already, but as far as going out in the bush and all that, I think that's really good to have that educational value, but my question is how do we approach telling people that is our main education, like being out there? Like, how would we start explaining to people that we need to move forward and become bush people again, opposed to living in our communities? Like, how would you foresee that?
I think it's a real challenge because when you tell people you're going to go and do like university out in the bush, people are like, you can't do that. And the elders, man, they get so frustrated. Like we spend like the mornings doing like lectures around a fire and like talking, and they're like, put the books down and the papers down. Like we need to go check the fishnet. Like there's a lot of tension there, and it's a really, really hard tension. But I think that tension's really real. Like you want to go hunt moose, but you have to negotiate self-government. You have to be able to read a briefing note, and you need to know how to reload a rifle safely. Like this is our reality, and it's crazy. But I think that, what you're saying in terms of like, we need to go back in the bush. I think if everybody, it's like when I ask myself, what's the best way to live? Where should I be? I should be in the bush with my kids, not down at conferences in Ottawa lobbying the government for more funding. Like it's confusing. But I think that tension is really real, and that's, what we grapple with when we're talking about education or even how to be, and it's tough. And like, I don't know the answer.
I think we're not allowed to have any more free time. Like, that's the way my juju teaches it too, is when you wake up in the morning, you have something to do, and you go to sleep when you're done. And that's something I think was taken away from us, is we always had something to do now. We don't got much to do. Like my juju plays bingo. She doesn't like to play bingo. She plays bingo. She hates it, but she does it. You know what I mean?
We're talking about the importance of hard work and how everybody used to have jobs. And I think that's something like at Dechinta, you have to sort of move into that practice of work. Like you get up, you chop wood, you make kindling, you make a fire, and you can see like the elders work all day long from the moment they get up. And like you see how lazy some of the young people are, and they just get so frustrated. But you see over time, if the example is there of how to work together, and that's something I think that when you're out in the bush for 8 weeks at a time, man, you have to figure out how to work together. And that's really, really valuable. So I think like we need more situations where we're out in the bush and we just have to figure it out together, and we have to learn how to work again and be motivated. And I think that's the beauty of like being out in the bush, is you feel really good. And it makes you feel really, really good. And you can't quantify that, you can't put it into a metric, you can't tell a funder that, but the more time you spend in the bush, the stronger you feel and the better you feel. And I think that's something, nobody can take away, but you have to practice it.
I really want to thank you for your presentation, because I think it was remarkable. As I just said to my colleague here, I think you could just do a mic drop right now, because that was excellent.
I'm really anxious, so thank you.
My question to you is this, and many thoughts while you were presenting, so lots of questions I could ask, but I think, we're talking about a post-secondary kind of context here, but I think kind of what you're advocating for as well is almost like a reconsideration and a revamp of our traditional approach to education, kind of writ large. I have very young children, and I have children who are struggling in the traditional school system, and I think what you're kind of advocating for is a rethink of our traditional approach to education and marrying the traditional and the non-traditional ways to kind of hit a balance. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing here, you know, from this young man over here as well, is that struggle between the contemporary and the traditional meeting and you walking that line between the two. And I'm wondering, have you seen that struggle? Have you seen that problem with students in communities of marrying the traditional and the non-traditional together? And where does that take you?
Well, I think it takes you to the continual sort of conclusion that the education system is totally broken, and that, you know, by taking kids out in the bush to set a trap one day a week, like, that doesn't cut it. We need to totally re-engage what kind of pedagogy we teach with and what kind of worldview we're teaching. And like, when we're, you know, out at Dechinta, it's always about values. You know, it's like, what are the laws, like, what does it mean to be respectful? You're going back to these really core practices. And I think that, you know, I see my kids and I see the difference of them when they're out at Dechinta and they're running around and they're learning and they're spearing fish and they're doing math and they're having a blast, and they get back and they just hate school because they're so fucking bored. And, you know, and then they get to go out trapping once a semester and they have the best time and they learn so much. So I just think, you know, our school system, I saw a meme the other day, it was like, you don't hate Mondays, you hate capitalism. And I think that kind of sums it up. It's like, what are we going to school for? So if we change what we're going to school for and how we learn, then we're going to change what kind of society we have. And I think that that's sort of the fundamental thing, is we need to think about what's our vision for, like, when the Westminster system isn't there anymore and we have real nation-to-nation government in Canada, let's make sure we're working towards that vision in our education system. Because right now, like, what are we educating kids for? We're not really sure we're educating them to get a job. It makes no sense. So I think that, you know, it's like, throw it out, start again, and we don't have to start again, because if you ask, you know, in any community, how did you teach? Higher education existed. It existed before settlers came here, and it still exists. And so we have an education system that's here. We just need to, I think, you know, listen and pay attention and fund it.
Can I ask one really quick question as well? You talked about rivers of reconciliation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and maybe tell me how I could get in a boat.
Well, first, Heritage Canada has to fund it. Is anybody here from Heritage Canada? So it's going under an application for Canada 150 Legacy Project. And so it'll go from there, but the idea is to have traditional canoe builds and outreach all this winter all across the nation, and conversations and communities, and just getting people on board to volunteer and sit around together on fires and talk and build canoes. And then in May, we're going to get on 5 different waterways for 15 weeks and stop in as many communities as we can and as many traditional gathering places as we can. And it's going to be really fun. So if they fund it, then we'll figure out how people can get in canoes. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm having trouble knowing where to start. I thought maybe I should just get you afterwards and try to, like, live trap you, and then, you know, but I'm going to risk it and go for it now. As a non-Indigenous researcher dealing with some of these messy questions, I'm really feeling what you're putting down. And I mean, there's so many things I would like to talk to you about, but you know, I'm in a stage in my research right now where it's messy and it's making me uncomfortable, and it's not what I wanted it to be or what I expected it to be, and it's making me question my history and my life and what I am doing, what I'm doing. And it's gotten so overwhelming to this point, it just blows my mind, and I don't deal with it most days. And I heard you saying these things that I just felt so strongly in my heart, and I just wanted to know, as someone who's, you know, completed their PhD, if you have any advice for us researchers who are dealing with these messy things.
Yeah, the more uncomfortable you feel, the better you're doing, and dive into that uncomfortableness, because that's, I think, what, you know, like we say, like, oh, being unsettled, decolonization, it's like you should feel really uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable all the time, and I feel like that's the work that needs to happen, and that you just have to be brave in that work, and you need to, you know, be strong and dive into the messy stuff and feel uncomfortable and unpack things and figure out, you know, where you can stand in a good way from where you are.
Thank you.
I'm curious I understand that you're doing programs and you're teaching kids more than just the 1 week a semester type of deal with the going on the land and learning things, but I'm curious I'm not sure how the Yellowknife Northern Studies is now, considering from your experience, but if it's still the same or roughly the same, what would you consider in the changes of it?
Well, they have a new, for those of you who are from the NWT, they have a new Northern Studies curriculum that they've trialed last year, and they're really making an effort. They want Northern teachers in front of those classes teaching the new curriculum. There's a big residential school component, and I think it's a really, really great start. They had a Wise People's Committee, and now they're looking at Northern Studies 20 and 30. And they're having that conversation about, can we do it on the land? And so we're really excited that that conversation is happening. And GTC has amazing new curriculum, this Gwitch'in history curriculum that's amazing. So it's like GTC is leading the boat on that one. Diga School in Providence, they go to the Horn Plateau and the Mackenzie Mountains every fall with all their students for like 8 weeks with like flour. So there's some like really incredible things happening. And I think it's just pushing the Department of Education to recognize what the communities want to do and give them the power to do those programs, because we could be having land-based high school right now. We have so many amazing resources. So I think that change is coming, but man, it's slow, and there's a lot of resistance to, the suggestions coming from the community level at the department.
Hi. Is language incorporated?
Language is incorporated. There's a lot of language speakers on site, and we've done programs where we've done language. Tough because it's always like, which language do you do out of all of the languages? So we've done some Welede and some Chip and some Slavey. And but really the push and the ask is that language should just be integrated in everything, and could it be an immersion program? So what's happening with Denezati, the University of Victoria has been doing a program that's a mentor apprenticeship program in the date show, and that's been going really, really well. So looking at, that kind of model, how we could get fluent language speakers in as like language mentors and have it be more integrated. But I think that's sort of like a constant struggle in finding language teachers that are available and want to come out in the bush too is really tough, because I think our language experts are really stretched in lots of directions for translation and being in the school, and therefore the challenge of how do we get more people speaking the language so there's more resources for language. But yeah, totally a challenge.
And I think that if at some point they create region-specific curriculum, then we'll be able to focus on Gwitch'in and Slavey and Clecho. So
yeah, and that's sort of the hope in the conversations we're starting to have with Jordan, is to support like a land-based university curriculum in Gwitch'in territory, and then you could have Gwitch'in. So every region having a program.
Any other questions? I think we got room for one more. Mandy.
That's our program manager, Mandy, who's speaking tomorrow. She's way more articulate than me, so you should go to her presentation tomorrow.
Sorry, this isn't a question but a comment, and I was going to save it for my presentation tomorrow, but I'm just going to say it now. Sorry, what you were saying about traditional versus contemporary education, I found it really confusing, because the pedagogical methods that we use at Dechinta are traditional Indigenous pedagogical methods. So when you're talking about traditional, I get confused when people are talking about traditional mainstream white methods, or if they like the Indigenous methods are like the contemporary new way white education is going. But I think it's just important to distinguish that the traditional Indigenous way of teaching and learning is what is done at Dechinta. Just I think the terminology is important to think about a little bit. So, thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Our final speaker of the afternoon is Hayden King. Hayden is Potawatomi and Ojibwe from Beausoleil First Nation on Chimnising in Huronia, Ontario. And at Ryerson University, he is the director of the Center for Indigenous Governance in the Faculty of Arts, assistant professor in the Department of Politics and Public Administration. And in this spring, he will be joining us here at the School of Public Policy and Administration in the Indigenous Policy and Administration program. So I am personally very excited to be welcoming Hayden in the spring as a new colleague. So I would like to invite everyone to join me in welcoming Hayden King.
Miigwech Heather, Anin Bojo, Kiriben, Kirigen Zibi, Nishnabek Aki, Miigwech. I'm really excited to be joining Carleton. Anybody that puts a conference together like this, I think I'm really looking forward to working with. I've been to a lot of academic conferences, and rarely do you get inspired. But I think some of the things I've learned here today, whether it was teaching on the Long Walk song, or from Randall, the teaching on Creator song, or just about Gwitch'in law generally, or hearing from conversations with Wade I had in the hallway, or the guy selling crafts. I mean, it seems like it's a conference that I'm happy to be a part of, and would like to be a part of well into the future as well. So I was asked to present on a research paper, and I guess this is my research paper. Those Who Belong: How Modern Treaties Are Reconfiguring Indigenous Citizenship. This is not really an area that I have researched a lot. I guess it's personal. I'm interested in this personally. I grew up as a mixed blood Anishinaabeg man on and off reserve. Really close connection to my community, Chimnissing. It's the Great Sturgeon Island in southern Georgian Bay. Raised by a single father, Potawatomi father, Ojibwe father, but went to school off reserve. So the only Indian family. Often face a lot of racism, discrimination, even though I can pass as a non-native person. So issues of identity and citizenship have always been a part of my life growing up anyway. And now today I work with my community on governance issues, and one of the things that we work on, I'm the coordinator of our governance committee. One of the things we work on is a membership code, or membership policy, or citizenship law. We're not sure what to call it. And legally, our chief and council are concerned legally if we can call this a law, given that we're a band council and the Indian Act is our constitution. So I've been thinking of, increasingly thinking about citizenship and membership, and how we define ourselves, and how we're able to define ourselves, and what that says about, do we have any theory or concepts to help us explain or understand really this citizenship void that Erin talks about. So I decided to talk a little bit about that, and really I'm just going to go through some of our identity issues, look at how we've got to where we are today, and then look at how where we're going, and how modern treaties are potentially reconfiguring our notions of identity and citizenship. Outside of modern treaties, how we're doing that outside of modern treaties through the Indian Act, or independent of both of those avenues. So I think it's probably no surprise that the current situation is one of a crisis for identity generally, and that's a generalization, because many Indigenous people are quite strong in knowing where they belong, who they belong to, and have protocol, whether they're codified or not, about who belongs to their communities. But we seem to, every week it seems to be a new crisis. In just the past 4 weeks, there's 4 stories here of issues that we're having around identity, Indigenous identity. We have the story of the Heltzuk basketball player who was born in Haiti. He's a black man, but he has status in Heltzuk community, but he wasn't allowed to play basketball. What does this say about our notions of blood and belonging, and also, some uncomfortable discussions about racism among ourselves. A new round of evictions in the community of Ganawage Mohawks, evicting non-native members of their community, often spouses of band members, because there's just no room on the reserve, and also a desire to ensure the integrity of the nation. We have a Montaigne Métis First Nation, a collection of Métis individuals that identify as Métis via heritage, that have registered as a charitable First Nation, and lobby on behalf of Indigenous rights for other communities that they have no relationship with. The Ontario Algonquin Agreement in Principle, the news story last week about how that community is choosing to enlist members based on heritage as opposed to blood, and heritage going back perhaps in some cases 200-300 years, a single ancestor. And each of these stories presents a debate about identity, and I think that it just reveals the complexity and also the challenge and really the crisis that we're facing. Some of us are facing when it comes to identity, and there's a reason that things are the way that they are. Right? We have endured 150, 250 years of colonization, of settlers, colonizers, government administrators telling us who we are, who qualifies to be Indian, who we belong to. I mean, it's not, all of you will be familiar with the diversity of terms with which are used to describe us. Aboriginal, Indigenous, Indian. The Ministry of Indigenous Affairs in Canada has undergone 3 name changes in 5 years. We, as First Nation people, Indigenous peoples, Anishinaabe, Gwitch'in peoples, we might be band members, we might be citizens, we might be non-status Indians, we might be status Indians. You can be 6-1 status. You can be 6-2 ABC status. You can be the classifications and qualifications for Indians in this country, Indigenous peoples in this country, Anishinaabe and Gwitch'in peoples in this country is really bewildering. And it started, I guess, 1850. I think it probably started before that. It started after the War of 1812. And I'm speaking primarily about Great Lakes people, Anishinaabe people, Haudenosaunee people, Nahiu people. That's the territory that I come from, the Great Lakes, eastern Lake Huron. So for us, we've had a very prolonged relationship with French and English colonists, and really post-War of 1812, we started to see the desire, the interest, the demand by settlers to regulate Indigenous identity. The first attempt was 1850, and it was surprisingly broad. Anybody of Indian blood, if you lived with an Indian, you could be considered an Indian. If you were married to an Indian, anyone that has a parent that's an Indian, anyone adopted by Indians. So, we could consider whether or not this was an intentional strategy to have, settlers become Indians, or if it was just, we'll let you determine who belongs in your community yourself. Now, this broad classification, and really the definition doesn't really matter too much. It's the presumption that the colonial government at the time made, that they were in a position to determine who was and was not Indigenous, an immigrant government deciding who is and is not Indigenous. And then we really started to see the formalized regulation of identity in the 1857 Gradual Civilization Act, 2 of those through the Gradual Enfranchisement Acts all the way to the Indian Act in 1876. And those Gradual Civilization Acts were really designed to remove any legal distinction between Anishinaabe, Gwitch'in, Nahiu, Mohawk, Seneca people and settlers. And so they had the process of enfranchisement. You could write a test if you were male, if you were 21 years old, if you were debt-free, if you were of good moral character. You could write a test, and then you could become an honorary white man. And this is part of the law, right? It was the first time in the history of the world where a government attempted to declare a person of another race than that which they were born into. Gradual civilization, of course. And unfortunately, it sort of backfired for the government. Only one individual applied to become an honorary white man. He was successful. His name is Elias Hill from Six Nations. Although when you enfranchise, the government would give you some of the reserve land. They would carve off a piece of the reserve land and then give it back to you in fee simple. And then when they told Six Nations, well, this is your first honorary white man, give him his 10 acres, they refused to do so. So poor Elias Hill became homeless. And then, so we had the Gradual Enfranchisement, Gradual Civilization Acts, really, and this is, really, again, trying to assimilate legally, politically, culturally Native people, take us further away from our own notions of belonging. And of course, the Indian Act took this to dizzying heights with its continued insistence on very rigid definitions of who is and is not Indigenous, and they base that primarily on blood, except if you were a non-Native woman that married a Native man before 1985, or except if you were a Native woman that married a non-Native man, or were the child of such a union. So the primary status, however, is blood quantum, and we know today from research of colleagues of mine like Pam Palmater that blood quantum is sort of a dead end, or at least when it comes to status. I don't think we really need to worry about Indigenous identity enduring into the future independent of the Indian Act. But nonetheless, the Indian Act took our notions of imagining the Indian and identity really to the extreme, and only recently have begun to draw those regulations back. Now, this contrasts, of course, with our more authentic notions of Indigenous identity, notions of belonging that we've practiced for many, many years, time immemorial, if you will. So for Anishinaabeg people, we have the ever-expanding circle. Welcome many people into our communities. You didn't have to be Anishinaabeg to come into our communities. In fact, when the French and the English arrived, we welcomed French and the English men and women into our communities. We had the concept of the ever-expanding circle. For the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations, they had a very similar concept. This was extending the rafters of the longhouse to make room for new people. For the Nehiu, you could be adopted into their communities through a process that made you, for all intents and purposes, a cousin. And this, all of these policies or laws are based on stories. So the Cree, for instance, based their adoption policy on the time that the trickster was adopted by wolves. And the only requirement that he was obliged to honor was that he lived like a wolf. He accepted the laws and the rules of the wolf. And so when it comes for the Anishinaabeg and the Haudenosaunee, it's the same thing. We don't have blood quantum, heritage, but if we adopt you into our community, it's expected that you follow our rules and our laws. And then identity, again, Erin mentioned the close relationship between citizenship and nationhood. You can't separate the two. Citizenship, fluid, dynamic, flexible, just like nationhood. For Anishinaabeg people, we are described as that. We describe our political relationships or our nations as a fire. Sometimes we just need the nation to be our small group, maybe our family, maybe one of those camps on the land. And then other times we need help from one of those camps, and the nation becomes a little bit bigger. And then sometimes we're being pushed out of our territory by American expansion, and we become an inferno, and we create a confederacy or revitalize a confederacy, and we push to ensure we can maintain our lives and our economies on the land. So nationhood is extremely fluid for us, always has been very fluid for us. Kinship or clan responsibilities, obligations, governance, obligations to the land are a central part of nationhood. You can't have citizenship without having a relationship with the land. And of course, it was nationhood was always international in focus, whether or not we practice diplomacy with the land, with the moose, with the deer, with the muskrat, or we practice diplomacy with the Mushkego in the north or the Dakota in the west. Those were always conceived of as international. And this is important, I think, because of the way that we conceive of citizenship today, which is somewhere between the two. It's somewhere between our authentic notions of Indigenous identity, belonging, and this imposed colonial brainwashing that's been undertaken for the past 150 years. So Audra Simpson talks about Indigenous identity being forced to exist today within the parameters of the settler colonial world and also the traditional Haudenosaunee world, ancestral and immediate past, the teachings from the ancestral and immediate past, somewhere in between. And of course, Leroy Littlebear talked about this when he described jagged world views, this idea that it's not really an idea, it's a material fact that over the past century and a half, 2 centuries, we have been inculcated to change our worldviews, and so we have these competing worldviews in our minds as Indigenous peoples. What are our values, our norms of how to live in the world? Often those are in conflict with each other between the European worldview and the Indigenous worldview. So we find ourselves today somewhere in between, struggling to figure out how to revitalize notions of belonging within this very complex space. So we are, of course, moving out of this inertia and towards new directions in defining ourselves. I think, there's not, the role of our resistance to these processes cannot be understated. I think that we have continued to resist despite adopting some of the colonial notions of belonging. We've continued to resist. It was our resistance that led to changes in the Indian Act in 1951 that removed some of those really restrictive barriers on our movement, cultural practices, all that kind of stuff. It was our resistance that led to Bill C-51 in 1985, which allowed women to retain their status if they married a non-native man, and also allowed communities to take control of their membership policies. And then, of course, Bill C-3 in 2010 further ended that discrimination, allowing women to pass on their status to their grandchildren. But it was really 1985 opened the door. That legislation opened the door to communities defining who could be in their communities, live in their communities, do business in their communities. Section 10 of the Indian Act was amended so that communities could develop their own membership codes. A few communities took that up, especially in Ontario, but there was the link between status and band membership was severed. So we can determine who can be in our community, who has to follow our laws, what their obligations, their rights are, but we can't determine who has status, right? Indian Affairs is not going to give up that power. They're never going to give up that power. I think the goal is still to continue to unmake Indians. But nonetheless, we have seen in recent years, probably the last decade, a renewed push towards the development of membership codes and citizenship codes through the Indian Act Section 10. A lot of Ontario communities and Anishinaabe communities are really pushing to write those laws themselves. I mentioned my community. We've had some pretty contentious debates about blood quantum. Should you be required to be 25%, 50% Anishinaabe, Chimnasing Anishinaabe to be a member of our community, or should we consider more authentic, historic practices of belonging? And those debates are, as I said, very difficult, and have taken a little bit of a toll on our community. And I think that they have for other communities, independent of the Indian Act. So we have the modern treaty process, of course, which we've been talking about throughout the day, which also includes a provision for citizenship laws. So depending on the modern treaty, you can include the parameters of enrolled members right in your modern treaty, or you can commit to making a constitution and then developing a citizenship law or policy or code out of that constitution. So there have been a few. I'm just going to look at a few of these examples. There are many others, and I just wanted to give you an indication of some of the work that's being done. So the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement was the first modern treaty, of course. The Cree and the Inuit require that for status to be a member of the modern treaty, to be recognized in one of the Cree communities, you should be either born in the community, have Cree ancestry, be a child of a mother or father with Cree ancestry, be adopted by a mother or father of Cree ancestry, and importantly, there is a residency component. So you have to live in the territory, or at least be in the territory. If you're out of the territory for more than 10 years, then you can your benefits from the treaty can be suspended. And there's generally statements in each of the modern treaties talking about the importance of Indigenous identity and belonging. I guess since the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement was the first, we had something from the former Minister of Indian Affairs, negotiator on behalf of Quebec, talking about how the modern treaty is so important for citizenship, not so much the Cree and the Inuit citizenship, but for the society of Quebec. And we'll get to learn more about the Cree and the Inuit, and that's a good thing for us. And this sort of language has changed over the course of development of modern treaties. So the Niska citizenship policy, and their language of citizenship was new in the mid-1990s and was pushed back by Canada. Canada didn't like them using the language of citizenship. But they kept it relatively traditional. They codified their traditional processes and practices of adopting members into the community. So they don't have blood quantum or even heritage requirements. You can apply for Niska citizenship through a process of adoption. If you marry into the community, if you live in the community, you can apply for Niska citizenship. But of course, as most modern treaties require, you have to be a citizen of Canada, and ensuring that exclusivity, you can't be a beneficiary of another modern treaty. So the Nunavut Final Agreement, this is one of the most forceful declarations of self-determination in any modern treaty agreement, which is kind of ironic because the creation of Nunavut was probably the most, of all the modern treaties, made the most impact on Confederation generally. But Inuit certainly made it clear that they are in charge of defining who is and is not an Inuk, and no one else is going to do that on our behalf. So for them, application for enrollment, you must be Inuk, defined by Inuk custom. You have to identify as Inuk, and you have to be associated in some way with the settlement area, and of course also you have to be a Canadian citizen, so there's that tension, right, we see. But it's interesting to read in the land claim that they do not get specific. They leave those responsibilities and obligations up to community committees that review applications and determine who is and is not Inuk. So these are just a few examples from modern treaties on how modern treaty signatories, Indigenous modern treaty signatories, are reconsidering and re-articulating identity, belonging, citizenship. And I think that it reveals a little bit of a tension between being Canadian and being Inuk, or being Niska, or being Cree. And so I'm interested in trying to understand this or explain this. And again, it's a research paper, right? So I'm trying to apply some theoretical stuff. So there's a number of explanations that we could draw on, or frameworks that we could use to try to understand what's happening in this tension, the current state of identity for Indigenous peoples through the modern treaty process. We can look at a sort of very liberal multiculturalism. So the modern treaty process, the citizenship and modern treaty process is just reflective of liberal multiculturalism. It's a sign that Canadians are doing something good. They're accepting minority populations, peoples into the body politic. It's a very positive way of looking at things. Of course, Alfred and Corntassel would describe these processes really, bluntly as assimilation, as incorporating yourself into Confederation, a worldview, a way of articulating identity through political, legal, and economic norms that are in fact in contrast with authentic Indigenous worldviews. Is that what's happening? John Burroughs, again, is a little bit more pragmatic. He sees modern treaty citizenship processes as Nishnabek, or not, well, we do have some self-government stuff, but Indigenous peoples expanding the circle, just like the Nishnabek concept of expanding the circle, and welcoming Canadians in. So by creating these modern treaties, we're revitalizing our legal traditions, and this is, recovering Canada, of course, to be the the place that it was always meant to be. And that, of course, is contingent on Canadians recognizing the laws, norms, rules of Indigenous peoples of the territory. So I'm not sure where we see that to any great extent, certainly not if court cases and blockades are any indication. So finally, there's Audra Simpson's politics of refusal. And in her book, Mohawk Interrupted, she talks about the community of Ganawage and the identity challenges and notions of belonging that they've had to face. And she describes kind of the history that I talked about, of course, in more depth about Indian Act rules and regulations really trying to make the community disappear. And their refusal to do that. And that refusal takes on interesting configurations when they define nationhood while being constrained by these political dynamics, by settler colonialism. And so what you have is this, not perfect, not authentic, sometimes not very pretty articulation of Mohawk nationalism. And it's an example of just the resistance to give up, the resistance to abdicate that authenticity as Mohawk, as Haudenosaunee people. And I think that, and again, all of this is just preliminary. I'm just thinking about it and working through it. It's my, but I'm leaning towards that sort of explanation or understanding of what's happening in the modern treaty process as well, and even through the Indian Act processes of re-articulating our citizenship and belonging. I think that we recognize, and this varies between modern treaty signatories, but we recognize the political dynamics that we exist in, and we're just trying to assert some degree of indigeneity within that less than perfect framework. It's not a blanket excusal of the modern treaty process. It's not a blanket endorsement of it. It's just a continued refusal through that system to insert our indigeneity. So, when we think about the next 40 years, and we think about modern treaties and citizenship, I have no idea where we're going in the next 40 years. People talk about modern treaties as terminating Aboriginal people's relationship to the land through extinguishment of title, and the Niska Nation will no longer exist because people are fleeing taxation. And I think that those are certainly challenges, but we also see this insistence, however we define our citizenship, whatever nation that we come from, we see that re-emerging. And earlier today, the conversation about returning to the drum, I think that that's a really important, I think that that's an indication, rather, that Indigenous identity is not disappearing, that it's continuing to grow, and our pride as Indigenous people is continuing to grow, and that'll be manifest in the codified notions of belonging, whether through modern treaties or the Indian Act or an Indigenous nationalism of some other manifestation. So I think that I'm positive over the next 40 years that we'll continue to refuse to disappear and assimilate, and Indigenous identity will recover from this very long absence of authenticity, I guess. So that's my research paper. So Shimikwich. So I guess I'll take questions.
So in your discussion of enfranchisement, you mentioned that there was only one individual who went through the enfranchisement process. Do you mean that there was only one individual who went through the took the test enfranchisement process? Because as far as I know, you could still be enfranchised for a long time if you went to university.
Yep. So this was the 20-year voluntary enfranchisement process before the Indian Act. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank
you. So yeah, if you wanted to go to medical school or university or join the army, be involuntarily enfranchised. Yeah. So that's obviously has affected many, many people.
Okay, I just wanted to specify. I was confused about whether or not that was the only case of enfranchisement that was official or not.
Hi. Last summer, as part of the IPA program,
we had the chance to visit the Kitigan-Zibi First Nation, which, for those who don't know, is an Anishinaabe community in Quebec. And they gave us a presentation about band membership. And one of the things that stuck with me was that even within the community, there's this idea between the status and non-status members of the band that somehow the status members, there's this pervasive idea that they're more authentically Indigenous. And I guess my question for you coming out of that is, how do Indigenous people combat that internalization of an imposed system of membership, of belonging? Yeah, I mean, obviously we're going to have that discussion. We're going to continue to have that discussion internally. We're having it, of course, all the examples that I mentioned at the outset of this presentation are examples of conversations that we're having internally, working through these issues. But status, I remember being invited to a Facebook group, status Indians only. And it just is an indication of how we have adopted this very perverted logic of belonging, and we still cling to it in some cases. We have modern treaties and negotiation, and the sticking point is, well, we don't want to give up our status. We don't want to give up some of the rights that are a part of the Indian Act. And that's not true for many other communities. But I think that, yeah, I mean, I don't really know how to answer your question aside to say that, we are working it out within our communities. And I'm not in a position to tell Kitigan-Zibi how to work that out. We have it in our own conversation, and at Chimnasing, when we talk about membership, we sit around in our rec center, and we take turns talking, and people talk about how it's important to have blood to be a part of our community, and we need to ensure that that blood quantum is high. We have some elders in our community that 50-75% of blood quantum. And then, of course, other people that have the contrasting opinion and draw on more traditional protocols. So we have elders in our community meetings that, duke it out about this discussion. So we're talking about it. It's not a process that happens overnight. This is, as I said, we're trying to come out of this 200-year brainwashing experiment. A couple days ago, I guess. No, I mean, I've been thinking about this stuff. I think I think about this stuff, and but really, I just started to think about it from a modern treaty perspective. I've done a little bit of research on modern treaties, usually when it comes to land management, co-management, land use planning. But really, I just started to look in. I just started to go through the land claim agreements and look through the citizenship and enrollment processes. I really just started to do that when I was invited to give this talk. But I have been thinking about and working in my community for 5 years now on membership and citizenship issues and governance issues generally. So, and of course, as I said, I mean, I grew up with a pretty, my own identity crisis working through that. But the research, yeah, just a little while, yeah. I guess you always want to do that as an academic. You always want to make sure that you get your facts right, and that you're coming from it from a particular grounded perspective. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an obligation of the modern academy today. So I hope that it's all right. No one from Indian Affairs is standing up and telling me I'm wrong. Well, one person did. Yeah.
You mentioned the Algonquins of Ontario and everything that's been in the media recently, which is very, very interesting how they've chosen to identify people that want to be eventually part of the land claim. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it's not my habit to tell other Native communities what they should and shouldn't do, or critique them for that matter. I will say that I think that it's very interesting that the federal government has very rigid qualifications of blood quantum for who can be an Indian, but when it comes to surrendering title, anybody can be an Indian. So I think that that's a little bit problematic. But it's up to them if they want to define community by heritage, and hopefully those people that do have an ancestor, 200, 300 years ago, single ancestor, are a part of the community. That would be my hope and expectation. But I don't really know enough about it to say.
So what would you think about the communities? This is something that we've seen a few times where the government will recognize an individual as a status Indian, but the community won't recognize them as a member of their community. So what do you think should be done to rectify those sorts of situations?
Yeah. I think that if a community develops a citizenship law or a membership policy, they have thought a long time about who should qualify as a member of their community. And that doesn't always correspond with status. As I said, there are examples of communities that are not interested in blood or not interested in Indian Act qualifications to determine membership. So I actually don't think that it's uncommon that you would have individuals that are status but not band members, or band members but not status. And I didn't mean to pick on you about the enfranchisement comment, by the way.
You can pick on me because I also work in Indigenous affairs. It was just the enfranchisement question. I know, she was right. I want to maybe just caution you about saying that Indigenous affairs determines entitlement to registration according to blood quantum. You did cite the exceptions to that if you married, if I as a non-Native person married a Native person before 1985 and that kind of thing. But the whole kind of regime around deciding who is entitled is really Byzantine, and it's determined by the courts. And the problem with saying that the department still does it by blood quantum is that then you confuse it with what the Americans use, which is more blood quantum than Canada does. And that's with the basketball tournament. I don't know if that was, an issue there, but the other is just because it kind of perpetuates a myth that being a status Indian was determined by blood quantum when it really is not only dependent on that. It's sort of like saying Indians don't pay taxes. We don't want to perpetuate that myth either, because there's so many qualifications to whether you're on the reserve, off the reserve to pay taxes. And it's the same thing with registration. I'm not necessarily someone who likes to have been involved with determining who's an Indian and who isn't, because I think the whole scheme is highly questionable. But I would just caution you about sort of saying easily that it's determined blood quantum. Mm-hmm. And
I did say generally.
Yeah, no, you're right with the qualifications.
Okay. But. Yeah, I mean, it would be nice, and of course the courts have said that Indigenous peoples should be in charge of their own membership. Just a few years ago. Now, we can talk about
the Odanak decision. Well. Do you know about the Odanak decision?
No.
Okay, we will talk after, because it's changed the threshold for the vote to determine whether a First Nation can take over its membership under Section 10 of the Act. And unfortunately, the wording of the Act itself hasn't changed. But if your band hasn't held a vote yet, you might want to know about this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's not blood quantum anymore, or at least exclusively, which is good news.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on that. I think most of the changes have occurred simply because Native people have taken Indigenous affairs to court to get that right to determine who their people were. In our land claim, we don't base it on treaties, status, and all that stuff. We include all our membership that can prove their ancestry going back to 1921, and that they're a descendant of that. And we also do community acceptance for people that aren't Gwitch'in, that were Aboriginal, that lived in our area since the time of the signing of the treaty in up to 1955. But And this is still a big thing, because right now we're negotiating our self-government agreement, and the big thing is citizenship. Because 54% of our current membership does live outside of the GSA. And we have a feeling that number is going to continue to grow. This is why we started this with James Wilson and Norm Snowshoe, to get these youth educated. And we also included youth that are outside of the GSA so that they can look at us and say, hey, might be worth coming back to the territories. And maybe it's a good thing that the North right now is, especially in our area, is on an economic downturn. So we've turned our focus away from economics back to where it should come to the youth, to get them educated and come back to the territories. But also at the same time, James said, we want to attract them in, but we also want them to have the opportunity to go other places. And he and I have a disagreement. He says we don't have capacity in the territories. I did a Gwitch'in timeline on the number of people that we have education, and there's a ton of them. What James failed to recognize is we have a lot of Gwitch'in participants in our settlement area that are superintendents in the government. We lack capacity because they're not working for us. They're working for other people. We want to get those people back to working for us. So that's just one point I wanted to make, that I have a disagreement with my president. We do have the capacity. The thing is we don't have capacity right now to take on those challenges, because when the Tetlichi signed their agreement, the day they signed it, they were 55 people short to take over their programs. When we're negotiating our government, we're not going to take over any programs the day we sign. We're negotiating based on the fact that we'll take them over as we're ready for them, so that we don't run into the same problem. So just wanted to make that point.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, no, it was an interesting contrast to hear President Wilson's discussion of lack of capacity, and then hear Erin's discussion of actually we got lots of capacity, and your discussion as well. So maybe it's not so much a lack of capacity, but it's bridging the. Okay.
Yes, I'd also just like to make a comment. I had a very good friend, M.S. Naidu, who worked up in the Northwest Territories. He was born in India, moved to Africa, and eventually moved up north in 1973 to become an educator. He really believed in us. He believed in us. And he was my mentor for many years. And he passed about 2 or 3 years ago. And he called me one day and he said to me, the next time you come to Yellowknife, we're going to have tea. So I said, okay. And then he said, when Columbus went out looking for me, he found you. And he called you an Indian. We're not Indians. We all have our own names, our nation, our Gwitch'in nation. And at first they called us the Lushus. And for the life of me, I couldn't understand where this word came from. Apparently the Jesuits came up and supposedly saw our slanted eyes and called us Lushus. But because we thought that was a derogatory term, we changed our name to Gwitch'in. And just recently, a couple of weeks ago or a month or so ago, somebody posted a map of North and South America. Guess what? All the native tribes had their names posted on the whole North American continent. Just for your information. And that's why I'm proud to be Gwitch'in.
Oh.
Last one. So we talk a lot about building nation-to-nation relationships, And within talking about citizenship, we've got sort of these different levels of citizenship where we've got Canadian citizenship and then you've got different nations within Canada. So within your research and looking at this topic, I was just wondering if you could elaborate on, or if you've looked more at sort of the tensions between, Canadian citizenship and Indigenous citizenship into those nations. I've heard from many people that they don't feel comfortable voting in elections or participating in sort of those Canadian political or civic activities because they feel that they're not represented by the state, whereas they only feel sort of that membership to their Indigenous nation. So I was wondering if you've looked at that at all, or what your thoughts are.
I thought that's what I presented on. The tension between the, belonging to Canada or not belonging to Canada. I mean, Harry Neese's comment, we wish to affirm, not deny our existence as the Niska Nation, a nation that is within Canada. So I think that a lot of modern treaty signatories take that approach, and maybe they take it because it's pragmatic. Maybe the circumstances in which they find themselves. Other communities that are non-treaty signatories, in particular, are probably more sovereigntist-minded. I think. I mean, you have to consider the diversity of Indigenous circumstances in this country and their relationship to colonialism. I think to have a good understanding of how Indigenous peoples view Canadian versus Indigenous citizenship. I mean, yeah, I don't know. That doesn't answer your question, is it?
Kind of a broad question.
Yeah. Are you asking me if I vote in elections? I mean, is that?
No, like just more on the thoughts, because like sort of one of the components was being a Canadian citizenship in order to qualify for.
Canada's never going to negotiate a modern treaty if the charter doesn't apply. If you let non-Canadian citizens become a part of your nation, that's not going to fly for Canada. So you have to accept those terms of negotiating a modern treaty before you begin the process. Now, I think that there's really interesting things, ironically, maybe coming out of the courts and with the Salcotin decision. Recognizing Aboriginal title, like what can we do with that? What can we do with, what productive things can we do with the recognition of Aboriginal title? Right? It's still very much implicated in settler colonialism, but maybe we can use that to push a more sovereigntist agenda that is beyond the scope of Canadian legal, political, institutional frameworks to be truly Indigenous or sovereigntist, a word which maybe doesn't even apply to us, but
thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out and presenting us. And I would like to say big chimigwich and mazicho to all of our presenters from today. This concludes the formal part of our conference, but we're going to move into the atrium now. We will have a cultural performance by students from Nunavut, Sivuniksavut. I believe there's more food, and so I would just invite you all to stay and enjoy the performance in the evening, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. So thank you.